Chapter 344. Just like this, Yi Xian led the disciples of Blue Sword Sect and left Cold North Sect. Of course, when they left, all the treasures of Cold North Sect were taken away by Yi Xian. After leaving the frigid North Sect, Yi Xian brought everyone to the World Guardian Mountain. At this moment, Realm Protection Alliance was empty. Inside the Realm Protection Palace, Yi Xian looked around and was silent for a long time. Then, he said softly, "Take everything away." An hour later, Yi Xian and others left Realm Protection Alliance. All the treasures of Realm Protection Alliance were taken away by Yi Xian and others. Yi Xian and others didn't return to Blue Sword Sect. Instead, they went to the next place. Sweep. Soon, all the forces that went to Blue Sword Sect to help Realm Protection Alliance disappeared one by one. Crazy revenge. Yi Xian led the disciples of Blue Sword Sect to take revenge. And the true Imperial Law Realm experts of these forces were basically killed by the mysterious woman. Therefore, none of the forces could resist Yi Xian and others. Soon, Yi Xian led the disciples of Blue Sword Sect to the last force. Blue Waves Academy. In the sky above Blue Waves Academy, an old man blocked in front of Yi Xian and others. This person was the master of Ji Yun. The old man looked at Yi Xian and others with a complicated expression. "Can you let Blue Waves Academy go for the sake of little Yun?" Yi Xian shook his head. "Sorry, this time, I represent Blue Sword Sect." As he finished speaking, he pressed his right hand down. "Kill." Following Yi Xian's voice, the disciples of Blue Sword Sect behind him all rushed towards Blue Waves Academy. In front of Yi Xian, the expression of the old man changed. He was about to attack when a sword was already at his forehead. The old man looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, "If you want to die, then do it." The old man stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. Half an hour later, Yi Xian left Blue Waves Academy along with the disciples of Blue Sword Sect. In the air, the old man looked at the corpses on the ground with a trace of sorrow in his eyes. At that time, when Blue Waves Academy wanted to target Yi Xian, he strongly opposed it. However, Qiu Yuan believed that Yi Xian would lose without a doubt. One wrong decision and the 1,000-year inheritance of Blue Waves Academy was destroyed in a day. A moment later, the old man sighed softly, turned around, and left. Blue Sword Sect. Yi Xian brought everyone back to the Ashen Sword Sect. Right now, the 6 peaks of the Ashen Sword Sect had already collapsed. It was a complete mess. Looking at the Azure Sword Sect in front of them, the expressions of the people behind Yi Xian dimmed. Many people were no longer around. At this time, Yi Xian said softly, "Do a head count and settle the dead." Behind him, a disciple of the Azure Sword Sect slightly bowed. "Understood." After speaking, he turned around and left with a group of people. Yi Xian arrived at what used to be the Cloudy Sword Peak. All that was left of this place was ruins. Yi Xian sat on the ruins. He just sat there for the whole night. Many people were missing. Chen Beihan, Jian Xian, Lian Bixian, Zhang Tai, and Yu Qi. Yu Qi. Thinking of this, Yi Xian quickly entered the prison pagoda. Inside the prison pagoda, Yi Xian arrived in front of Yu Qi's soul. At this moment, Yu Qi's soul was wrapped in a sword light. Reconstruct the body. Yu Qi's problem was not only reconstructing the body, he also needed to repair his soul. Although it was an extremely troublesome matter, as long as there was hope, it was good. Dao Yi Academy. This chapter is not finished, please continue. Thinking of this, Yi Xian left the prison pagoda. He had to settle the matters in Azure World as soon as possible, then go to Dao Yi Academy. To rebuild Azure Sword Sect, what he needed the most was money. And now, Yi Xian had no lack of money. It could be said that he was the richest person in Azure World. One should know that those forces that he had gone to take revenge on were not ordinary forces. The wealth of those forces was in his hands. All kinds of treasures, spirit stones, he had lost count. Yi Xian searched for a few more mountain ranges within the territory of Azure Sword Sect. Very quickly, a palace was erected on top of these mountains. As for Yi Xian, he returned to Azure Province. After returning to Azure Province, the first thing Yi Xian did was to send out a summon order. Very quickly, the former students of Azure Waves Academy returned to Azure Waves Academy. In front of Azure Waves Palace, Yi Xian sat quietly. One by one, people came to him and bowed deeply. Now, not far from him, there were more than 20 people standing. All of them were former students of Azure Waves Academy. At this moment, the sound of the earth trembling came from afar. Yi Xian raised his head and looked. Not far from the foot of the mountain, more than 100 cavalrymen were rushing over. Azure Waves Dao soldiers. These Azure Waves Dao soldiers were very fast. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of Azure Waves Palace. 100 of them dismounted and knelt down on one knee in front of Yi Xian. Greetings, Dean. Everyone's voice was filled with excitement and agitation. They had waited for this day for a long time. Yi Xian said softly, "Get up." As soon as he said that, more than 100 people stood up and quietly stood to the side. At this moment, a beautiful figure suddenly flashed in the distance. Very quickly, a woman appeared in front of Yi Xian. Jiang Jiu. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian. Suddenly, she stretched out her jade-like finger and gently lifted Yi Xian's chin. "Do you still remember me?" Yi Xian stood up. He gently hugged Jiang Jiu and said softly, "Little Jiu." Hearing this, Jiang Jiu's delicate body trembled slightly. Very quickly, she wrapped her arms around Yi Xian's waist. "I thought you weren't coming back." Yi Xian smiled, "Why would I?" After saying that, he looked behind Jiang Jiu. Behind Jiang Jiu stood 10 people. These 10 people were the 10 people that he had selected previously. And at this moment, these 10 people were already in the Dharma Defensive Realm. Dharma Defensive Realm. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was a little shocked. Jiang Jiu suddenly smiled, "Are you a little shocked?" Yi Xian nodded. Jiang Jiu turned to look at the 10 people. Her expression was cold. "Greetings, Dean." The 10 people looked at Yi Xian. No one moved. Seeing this scene, Jiang Jiu frowned slightly. At this moment, Yi Xian smiled, "They are getting arrogant." As his voice fell, he had already disappeared. The next moment, bam, bam, bam. Before everyone's eyes, the 10 people were sent flying hundreds of feet away. The 10 people struggled on the ground for a long time before slowly getting up. Seeing this scene, everyone around was shocked, especially the 10 people. One should know that they were already in the Dharma Defensive Realm. It could be said that they were the top powerhouses in Qingzhou. However, they did not expect that in front of Yi Xian. They did not even have the ability to fight back. Jiang Jiu was also shocked. She knew that Yi Xian had become stronger, but she did not expect him to be this strong. As if thinking of something, she turned to look at the 10 people. "Greetings, Dean." The 10 people slowly stood up. Just as they were about to bow, a powerful sword will suddenly shrouded them. This chapter is not finished, please continue. The 10 people were stopped. In an instant, the 10 people knelt on the ground. Yi Xian slowly walked in front of the 10 people. "What? If I am not strong, you won't recognize me?" The 10 people were sweating profusely and did not speak. Yi Xian was expressionless. He lightly stomped his right foot. Boom! The 10 people sprawled on the ground. At the same time, everyone's bones were cracking. Yi Xian said calmly, "How did you achieve what you have today?" At this moment, one of them said in a trembling voice, "It was given by the Dean." Yi Xian was expressionless, and then? The person hurriedly said, "We know our mistakes. Please forgive us, Dean." Yi Xian shook his head and turned to look at Jiang Jiu not far away. "Their strength has increased, but I am very dissatisfied with their character. Therefore, I have decided to take back everything they have. As for their cultivation, consider it as a gift from me." When he finished, he turned to look at the 10 people. You are free. Hearing this, the 10 people's expressions changed drastically. The 10 people hurriedly begged, but Yi Xian had already turned and left. Not far away, Jiang Jiu glanced at the 10 people. His expression was rather complicated. You think that you are already the strongest in Qingzhou after reaching magic defending realm. You think that he needs to rely on you, needs you more than you need him. Therefore, you don't respect him like before. Unfortunately, you didn't expect that he is even stronger than you. He is so strong that you can only look up to him. Speaking until here, she slightly paused and then continued, from today onwards, you are free. In the future, no one will provide you with cultivation resources, and no one will come to nurture you. When she finished speaking, she turned and left. Behind Jiang Jiu, the faces of the 10 people instantly turned pale. Without cultivation resources, this was undoubtedly fatal for them. Because they could grow up to now because they only needed to cultivate and didn't need to care about anything else. But now, they didn't have this treatment. In the distance, those Blue Waves Academy students and Blue Waves Dao soldiers glanced at the 10 people, then turned and left. To them, Yi Xian was supreme. Moreover, their respect towards Yi Xian wasn't just because of Yi Xian's formidable strength, it was also because of everything Yi Xian had done for them. Yi Xian stood silently within Blue Wave's palace while Jiang Jiu stood behind him. Jiang Jiu glanced at Yi Xian and asked softly, "Why are you so angry?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I'm not angry, but they've already become arrogant. I don't need arrogant people. If I leave them alive, then all of you won't be able to suppress them when I'm not around." Not around? Jiang Jiu's beautiful brows knit together slightly. You're leaving Azure Prefecture? Yi Xian shook his head. Not Azure Prefecture. I'm leaving the firmament world. Leaving the firmament world? Jiang Jiu's frown deepened. You're leaving the firmament world? Yi Xian nodded. This time, I'm taking you to the Central Divine Prefecture. Everyone will be able to develop better there. Jiang Jiu said solemnly, then Azure Prefecture. Yi Xian said softly, naturally, we can't give up. We'll leave some people here and let them continue recruiting. Jiang Jiu thought for a moment, then nodded. That's fine. Yi Xian smiled faintly, then went to the martyr's palace with Jiang Jiu. Inside the palace, Yi Xian walked to Ji Yun's memorial tablet. A moment later, he said softly, Old Ji, Blue Waves Academy will soon become the largest academy in the firmament world. At this time, he frowned slightly, then took out a sound transmission stone. Soon, a voice came from it. Something happened to the ancient Wu clan. P.S. Low profile, continue to be low profile. Wait until I erupt, then I'll be high profile. End of this chapter. Chapter 345. Something had happened to the ancient Wu clan. Yi Xian frowned. After a moment of silence, he turned to look at Jiang Jiu. I have to return to the divine central continent. Bring the Blue Waves Academy disciples and Dao soldiers to the divine central continent later. Jiang Jiu nodded and said softly, be careful. Yi Xian nodded. You too. With that, he disappeared on the spot. Not long after Yi Xian left, a woman came to Blue Waves Academy. She was the ruler of Ning country, Tuoba Yen. After learning that Yi Xian had left, Tuoba Yen stood in silence for a long time before turning to leave. Yi Xian immediately rushed to the ancient Wu clan after returning to the divine central continent. When he arrived at the Wu clan, his expression changed. There was no one alive in the entire Wu clan. Yi Xian hurriedly looked around, but he did not see Wei Yang Tian anywhere. Zhang Xian appeared behind Yi Xian. He glanced at the corpses on the ground and said in a low voice, the ancient Wu clan has been exterminated. Yi Xian's expression was cold. Do you know who did it? Zhang Xian shook his head. Besides the Realm Defense Alliance, only the Celestial Gate can do this silently. The Realm Defense Alliance is obviously impossible. As for the Celestial Gate, they have no reason to attack the ancient Wu clan. Yi Xian said in a low voice, if it's not them, who else could it be? Zhang Xian looked around. Could there be another mysterious force in the Azure world? He shook his head. It's unlikely. If there is such a force, it would be impossible to hide from my Blue Sword sect and the Realm Defense Alliance. If it's not a force from the Azure world, it could be a force outside the Azure world. Outside the Azure world. Yi Xian seemed to think of something. He hurriedly took out a voice transmission stone and contacted Wei Tian. After a while, a low voice came from it. Who is it? It wasn't Endless Heaven's voice. Yi Xian's face darkened. Who are you? Where is the girl? After a moment of silence, the other side said, Scram. As soon as he finished speaking, there was no movement from the other side. In the field, Yi Xian's expression was terrifyingly dark. After a while, he suddenly felt that unending sky should be fine. That was because this girl had always been very mysterious. She was definitely not an ordinary person, and this unforeseen event was very likely related to her. Moments later, Yi Xian softly said, Teacher Uncle Zhang Xian, pass down my order. Help me find someone. She's called Wei Yang Tian. Zhang Xian nodded. All right. With that, he turned around and left. In a certain part of the starry sky, 9 giant dragons that were nearly 10,000 feet long were dragging a dragon chariot as they soared through the sky. Each of the giant dragons was emanating a dragon's might that could destroy the heavens and the earth. A little girl was sitting cross-legged on the dragon chariot. If Yi Xian was here, he would definitely be extremely shocked, because this little girl was Wei Yang Tian. There were 30 people around her, all dressed in white robes and wielding black staffs. Every one of them gave off an unfathomable aura. After an unknown period of time, Wei Yang Tian suddenly opened her eyes. There was a trace of confusion in her eyes, but they gradually cleared up. After a while, she seemed to think of something and turned to look in a certain direction. At this moment, a white-robed man not far away suddenly bowed respectfully. Is there something the Heaven Master needs? Wei Yang Tian withdrew her gaze and softly said, It's just a strand of distracting thoughts in the cycle of reincarnation. The white-robed man bowed again and said, Do you need me to sever it for the Heaven Master? Wei Yang Tian coldly glared at the white-robed man. Scram! The white-robed man's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly and respectfully retreated to the side. Just like that, the group headed into the depths of the distant starry sky. Gradually, the group completely disappeared into the boundless starry sky. Azure World. In the current Azure World, it could be said that Azure Sword Sect was the sole power, because in the entire Azure World, other than Celestial Gate, there was no other force that could contend against Azure Sword Sect. And Celestial Gate was a force that basically did not appear in the world, so in the entire Azure World, Azure Sword Sect could be said to be the strongest force. And Jiangjiao had also brought the Dao soldiers and students of Azure Waves Academy to the Central Plains, and now the headquarters of Azure Waves Academy was in Sky Cloud City. This Sky Cloud City used to belong to the Realm Defense Alliance, but now it belonged to him, Yi Xian. Not only that, Yi Xian also called Ling Han, Ji Banzwang, and the others to Sky Cloud City. In a large hall, Yi Xian looked at Ling Han and the others in front of him, and smiled slightly. Long time no see. Ling Han and the others looked at Yi Xian, and their faces were full of smiles. Now, Yi Xian's reputation in Azure Province could be said to be like the midday sun. Really like the midday sun. Now in the entire Azure Province, no one's reputation could be compared to Yi Xian's. Yi Xian smiled. I called you all here, other than to reminisce about the past. There's another matter, and that is I'm about to leave Azure World. Leave Azure World. Everyone was stunned. Ji Banzwang frowned slightly. To the galaxy? Yi Xian nodded. I still have many things to do, so in a few days at most, I will leave Azure World. Where are you going? Ling Han suddenly asked. Yi Xian smiled. Dao E Academy, this academy seems to be the best academy in our galaxy. You have to cultivate well, and in the future, come to this academy to look for me, understand? Ling Han smiled bitterly. I'm afraid we don't have that ability. Yi Xian shook his head. Your talent is not bad, the only thing you lack is purple source. In my Blue Waves Academy, you don't have to worry about cultivating purple source, you can cultivate with peace of mind. I believe, in no time, you will all reach the true Imperial Law tier. He wasn't being polite, because these people in front of him were indeed very talented, especially Ling Han and Ji Banzwang. These two were already at the peak of the true Imperial Law tier, and Yi Xian was only half a step into the true Imperial Law tier. Besides them, Mo Yunqi, Bai Zhe, and Ji Anji were also very talented. As long as they had enough cultivation resources, reaching the true Imperial Law tier was not a problem at all. One day later, after Yi Xian explained everything, he returned to Azure Sword Sect. In the rebuilt Azure Sword Hall, there were only 3 people, Yi Xian, Zhang Xian, and Gu Shaoxian. Zhang Xian looked at Yi Xian, and said in a low voice, "Why don't you wait a few more years before going to Dao E Academy?" Yi Xian shook his head. I don't have that much time to wait. He hadn't forgotten what the plain-dressed woman had told him. He had to work hard to become stronger, because although the World Prison Tower was peaceful now, he knew that this was only temporary. He couldn't rely on the plain-dressed woman forever. Apart from that, he still had to help Yu Qi reconstruct his physical body, and this matter couldn't be delayed. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Zhang Xian hesitated for a moment, and then sighed in a low voice. You are now the sect master of Azure Sword Sect. Yi Xian said, I want to give the position of sect master to the 2 martial uncles. Zhang Xian hurriedly shook his head. No, you are the sect master appointed by the sect master. Apart from you, no one else can be the sect master of Azure Sword Sect. Gu Shaoxian also nodded slightly. You are the sect master of Azure Sword Sect now. Even if you go to Dao E Academy, you will still be the sect master of Azure Sword Sect. Yi Xian still wanted to say something, but Gu Shaoxian glanced at him. This is your responsibility. Don't say any more, understand? Yi Xian smiled bitterly and nodded. All right. Gu Shaoxian nodded. When are you leaving? Yi Xian smiled. My matters are almost settled. I'm almost done, so I'll leave tomorrow. Gu Shaoxian glanced at Yi Xian. Remember to bring her back. Yi Xian solemnly said, I will. At night, Yi Xian left Azure Sword Sect, but he didn't leave. Instead, he returned to Qingzhou. There was still someone he wanted to see. Ning Country, Tuoba Yan's bedroom. Tuoba Yan, who was reading the memorials, suddenly raised her head. A man was standing not far from her. It was Yi Xian. Tuoba Yan retracted her gaze and continued reading. Yi Xian walked in front of Tuoba Yan. I am leaving Azure World. Tuoba Yan's hand trembled slightly. She didn't raise her head and continued reading the memorials. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then turned and left. He was very fast and silently disappeared from the hall. Tuoba Yan suddenly looked up. When she saw that the hall was empty, she was stunned. Soon, she got up and walked out of the hall. It was also empty outside. Tuoba Yan was stunned for a long time. Suddenly, a voice sounded in her ear. Looking for me? It was Yi Xian's voice. Tuoba Yan leaned into Yi Xian's arms and asked softly, Are you leaving? Yi Xian nodded. I am leaving Azure World. Tuoba Yan asked, Are you coming back? Yi Xian said, Yes. When? I don't know. Tuoba Yan fell silent. Yi Xian asked softly, Are you leaving with me? Tuoba Yan shook her head. As long as you return it. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then nodded. Okay. An hour later, Yi Xian was about to leave and Tuoba Yan suddenly said softly, Stay here tonight. Yi Xian was stunned, then grinned. Okay. A night of singing in the spring breeze. The next day, at dawn, Yi Xian left Ning Nation. This time, Yi Xian didn't return to the divine central continent. He found drunken Immortal in and took a small nebula warship toward outer space. On the nebula warship, Yi Xian looked back down. Azure World was getting smaller and smaller. He was leaving just like that. Yi Xian had a complicated feeling. He didn't expect to leave Azure Province and Azure World. When would he return? Yi Xian shook his head. He didn't know when he would return, but he was sure that he would. After a long time, the nebula warship entered the starry sky. This was Yi Xian's first time entering the starry sky. Looking at the endless starry sky, Yi Xian once again felt how insignificant he was. Insignificant. In the face of this vast universe, humans were insignificant. At this moment, a nebula warship suddenly appeared in the distant starry sky. It was extremely fast and arrived before Yi Xian's nebula warship in the blink of an eye. A middle-aged man flew out of the nebula warship and looked down at Yi Xian. Are you from Azure World? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. You are? The middle-aged man said coldly, Is Yi Xian in Azure World? Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, Are you looking for Yi Xian? The middle-aged man frowned. You know Yi Xian? Yi Xian nodded. I've heard of him. May I know why you are looking for him? The middle-aged man said calmly. I heard that he has the top item on the interstellar bounty list, so I want to borrow it from him. Hearing this, Yi Xian's face darkened. Chapter 346. Interstellar Bounty List. Yi Xian's face was gloomy. He knew that the news of the World Prison Pagoda must have spread. At this moment, the middle-aged man suddenly said, When I mentioned Yi Xian, your expression changed slightly. Why, are you familiar with him? Or are you Yi Xian? Hearing this, Yi Xian raised his head to look at the middle-aged man. Do I look like Yi Xian? The middle-aged man sized up Yi Xian. Rumor has it that Yi Xian is a swordsman, and a sword immortal. And you, I feel sword intent on you. You are also a swordsman, right? Yi Xian smiled and said, Yes. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes. So, you are Yi Xian? Yi Xian nodded, yes. Seeing Yi Xian admit it, the middle-aged man's mouth curled up slightly. It seems that my luck is not bad. Yi Xian smiled and said, Then, what are you going to do now? The middle-aged man's smile widened, Guess? Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, Seize the treasure, and then kill to silence them. The middle-aged man was stunned, then laughed and said, You guessed it right. As his voice fell, his entire body disappeared on the spot. Yi Xian suddenly heard a ka-chi sound, and then he felt a powerful pressure envelop him. Void-piercing realm. If it was before, it would definitely be very difficult for him to face a void-piercing realm powerhouse. But now, after devouring the soul of the Realm Protector Alliance leader and those powerhouses, he no longer felt any pressure when facing a void realm powerhouse. Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword, sword light flashed, and the sword was sheathed. Chi! The sound of blood spurting suddenly rang out. The scene quieted down. Yi Xian was already behind the middle-aged man, and at this moment, blood spurted out from the middle-aged man's throat. The middle-aged man looked ahead sluggishly and murmured, You are actually so strong. Behind the middle-aged man, Yi Xian said, It's my fault. Middle-aged man. Yi Xian took out the ethereal execution ring, and soon, the middle-aged man was directly absorbed by Yi Xian. Yi Xian found that the ethereal execution ring's function was to absorb soul, spirit power, and energy from the human body. It had to be said that this was against the natural order of the world. Of course, he wouldn't intentionally devour others for the sake of cultivation. As for the enemies who wanted to kill him, no matter how cruel they were to him, Yi Xian would not go overboard. The star cloud warship Yi Xian was on continued its journey. On the nebula ship, Yi Xian counted the spirit stones and treasures he had. Currently, he had no less than 1 million purple origin crystals. He had exchanged all the best quality spirit stones for purple origin crystals. As for treasures and cultivation techniques, he had left most of them to Blue Waves Academy and Blue Sword Sect. Currently, he had 4 heaven-ranked swords. As for the rest of the heaven-grade treasures, there were a total of 13. As for those below heaven rank, he left all of them to Blue Waves Academy and Blue Sword Sect. Currently, he didn't have many things, but they were the best. Moreover, he had left a large portion for Blue Waves Academy and Blue Sword Sect. Otherwise, he would have left even more. Several tens of thousands of violet origin crystals were enough to buy a heaven-rank spirit artifact. Hence, with 1 million violet origin crystals, he could be said to be extremely wealthy. In terms of cultivation, he was now at the peak of the true Imperial Dharma realm, a sword immortal. Other than that, he had not completely absorbed the experts he had devoured. It could be said that once he completely absorbed them, his strength would definitely increase greatly. Needless to say, in the firmament world, he was one of the strongest cultivators. However, Yi Xian knew very well that he would not be able to afford it. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. The enemy was not in the firmament world, but in this tower, and those who coveted this tower, and those bastards in the tower. To these people, he was still weak. He still needed to work hard. Dao Yi Academy. Yi Xian raised his head and looked into the distance. In the distance, there was a vast and boundless starry sky. After leaving the firmament world, to him, the starry sky in front of him was a whole new world. At this moment, an old man appeared beside Yi Xian. The old man bowed to Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, there are still 10 days until we reach the Dao Yi Academy. During this period, we might encounter a chaotic starry sky, so, young Master Yi, please be careful. Yi Xian nodded, I will be careful. The old man bowed, turned around, and left. Yi Xian returned to his room and entered the prison pagoda. As soon as he entered the pagoda, Xiao Linger floated in front of him. She grinned and extended her hand. Yi Xian smiled, then took out 2 spirit fruits and handed them to Xiao Linger. Seeing the spirit fruits, Xiao Linger's eyes lit up, and she hugged the fruits. After sending Xiao Linger away, Yi Xian went to the 2nd floor. In the 2nd floor, the Almighty on the 2nd floor was still there. The Almighty on the 2nd floor glanced at Yi Xian, but did not speak. Yi Xian walked to the Almighty on the 2nd floor. Was it the one on the 4th floor who spoke in the pagoda? He did not forget that when the woman in the plain dress was around, there was a voice in the pagoda that resisted her. Moreover, that person had threatened to kill him. The Almighty on the 2nd floor shook his head, above, but I do not know which floor it is. Even higher up. Yi Xian said in a low voice, I am the pagoda master now. Can I kill him? The Almighty on the 2nd floor said calmly, what kind of dream are you having in broad daylight? Yi Xian, the Almighty on the 2nd floor continued, unless the pagoda is completely restored and you have full control of it, then the life and death of all the creatures in the pagoda will be in your hands. Yi Xian shook his head and sighed, feeling somewhat helpless. He had no idea when the pagoda would be restored, and he did not know when he would be able to truly control the pagoda. The only thing he knew was that those guys in the pagoda wanted to kill him. And those who wanted the pagoda would also come to kill him. As if knowing what Yi Xian was thinking, the Almighty on the 2nd floor said coldly, do you know how many people in this world want this pagoda? And ask yourself, after getting this pagoda, did you change your fate? Yi Xian thought about it. If not for this pagoda, his and Yi Ling's fates would have been very miserable. Although he had worked hard along the way, it was undeniable that without this bit of luck, it would have been very difficult for him to reach this step today. The Almighty on the 2nd floor said, this pagoda has been suppressed by her, but you must remember, in the future, do not activate this pagoda at will. Otherwise, if the pagoda's seal breaks, your soul will be seriously injured. In addition, once those guys come out, they will definitely kill you and take your treasures. Yi Xian said softly, I am carrying a volcano with me. The Almighty on the second floor said calmly, be content. With that, she slowly closed her eyes. Yi Xian hesitated, then said, well, when will your injuries heal? The Almighty on the second floor did not answer. Yi Xian was speechless and did not ask again, leaving the prison pagoda. Inside the room, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the bed, his eyes closed. Stabilizing his cultivation. He had not reached the true defensive law stage for long and had not completely stabilized his cultivation. Otherwise, he could have obtained a sword. This chapter is not finished, please continue. He continued to break through. Not long after Yi Xian left the firmament world, a dozen people suddenly arrived at the firmament sword sect of the divine central continent, led by a middle-aged man. The dozen people had just arrived at the firmament sword sect and Zhang Xian appeared in front of them. Zhang Xian glanced at the dozen people and said in a low voice, you are? The middle-aged man said indifferently, is Yi Xian in the firmament sword sect? Zhang Xian frowned slightly. You are looking for him? The middle-aged man nodded. Zhang Xian said in a low voice, he is no longer in the firmament sword sect. The middle-aged man frowned. Then where is he? Zhang Xian glanced at the middle-aged man and the others and said in a low voice, you are looking for him? The middle-aged man smiled. To ask him some questions. Zhang Xian nodded. He has already left the firmament world. As for where he went, I do not know. Left the firmament world. The middle-aged man's frown deepened when he heard this. A short while later, the middle-aged man led the dozen people away. There was a trace of worry in Zhang Xian's eyes as he gazed at the middle-aged man and the others. Because this wasn't the first group to come looking for Yi Xian. It was the 9th group. All of them had come to look for Yi Xian. Moreover, all of them were void-piercing stage experts. A short while later, Zhang Xian sighed softly, turned around, and left. On the other side, the middle-aged man and the others didn't leave the firmament world immediately after they left. The middle-aged man glanced at the dozen people beside him, and they quickly turned around and left. Around 2 hours later, the dozen people returned to the middle-aged man's side. An old man walked over to the middle-aged man and said in a low voice, we have investigated clearly. Yi Xian has indeed left the firmament world. Left the firmament world. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment, and then he said, we must find this person. We can't let this pagoda fall into the hands of others. Send my orders. Have our people put down whatever they are doing and focus on finding this person. The old man nodded slightly. Understood. Soon, the dozen people left the firmament world. Not long after they left the firmament world, a black-clothed man suddenly arrived at the firmament sword sect. Within the firmament sword hall, Zhang Xian looked at the black-clothed man in front of him. Are you also here to look for Yi Xian? The black-clothed man said in a low voice, he is not in the firmament sword sect. Zhang Xian nodded, he has left. The black-clothed man fell silent. Zhang Xian glanced at the black-clothed man, you are? The black-clothed man said softly, I am here to pick him up. Zhang Xian was slightly surprised, pick him up. The black-clothed man nodded, to bring him back to the Dugu family. Zhang Xian was slightly puzzled, Dugu family? I think his surname is Yi. The black-clothed man shook his head, he has the bloodline of my Dugu family. This time, I have specially come to bring him back to the Dugu family. Zhang Xian wanted to ask more, but the black-clothed man had already turned around and left. Outside the firmament sword sect, the black-clothed man sighed softly, it's good that he left. As he said this, he seemed to have thought of something and his brows furrowed deeply. The family knows that he has a great treasure, but they don't know that he has a supreme expert behind him. Moreover, young Miss is still imprisoned in the endless purgatory. I'm afraid that something big will happen in the future. In the same place, the black-clothed man was silent for a long time. After a long time, he said again, no, we must find him. Only he can save young Mississippi. After saying this, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. P.S. Let me ask you something. If your body is weak, what should you eat? Chapter 347. 5 days later, Yi Xian's nebula worship came to a stop. Outside Yi Xian's room, a voice rang out. Young Master Yi, we've arrived at Dao Yi City. Moments later, the door opened and Yi Xian walked out. The elderly man was stunned when he saw Yi Xian. Yi Xian still looked the same, but there was an indescribable aura around him. He couldn't describe it, but he could feel it. Yi Xian asked, "Have we arrived?" The elderly man regained his senses and quickly replied, "Not yet, but we've arrived at Dao Yi City. This city is a subsidiary city of Dao Yi Academy and it's not far from Dao Yi Academy. Also, ordinary people are not allowed to enter Dao Yi Academy. Only those who pass the assessment can enter Dao Yi Academy." Yi Xian asked again, "Are there any conditions to enter Dao Yi Academy?" The elderly man smiled. "I don't know the details, but based on young Master Ye's strength, you're definitely qualified to enter Dao Yi Academy." Yi Xian smiled. "That might not be the case." The elderly man smiled. "Young Master Yi, you're too humble." Yi Xian smiled and walked out of the room with the elderly man. On the nebula worship, Yi Xian looked into the distance. At the end of his vision, there stood a huge city. It was huge, like a huge beast, giving off an invisible sense of oppression. He had seen the Thousand Beast City and Sky Cloud City before. These two cities could be said to be the biggest cities in the Azure Firmament world. Especially the Thousand Beast City, it had shocked him. But now, he realized that the two cities could not be compared to the Dao Yi City in front of him. No, there was no comparison. The city in front of him was not something that could be built by humans. The old man next to Yi Xian suddenly said, "Young Master Yi, do you know the origin of Dao Yi City?" Yi Xian shook his head. The old man said with smile, "Dao Yi City is not a simple place. Speaking of Dao Yi City, one must mention a person, Dao Yi Mu." "Mu Dao Yi?" Yi Xian asked, "Who?" The old man smiled faintly. Mu Dao Yi is a legendary figure in the never-ending star zone. This man's talent is extremely terrifying. He reached the true defensive Dharma realm at the age of 12 and became a martial god. He is almost the youngest martial god in the history of the never-ending galaxy. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned serious. A 12-year-old true defense realm cultivator. Furthermore, he was a martial god. This man was too much of a monster. The old man said, apart from that, he also established the Dao Yi Academy. It is the best academy in the entire never-ending galaxy and is a transcendent faction in the never-ending galaxy. Of course, the reason why it is so transcendent is that it does not involve itself in any conflicts in the outside world. Then he looked at Yi Xian. The Dao Yi Academy has gathered the top geniuses from countless worlds in the never-ending galaxy. There was a high platform in the middle of the city, and on top of the platform was a round pillar that was more than 30 zhang long. The testing pillar. Yi Xian asked around and found out that this round platform was left behind by the Dao Yi Academy to test those who wanted to join the Dao Yi Academy. Anyone could come and take the test. As long as they passed, they would have a chance to enter the Dao Yi Academy. Many people were already taking the test on the round platform. Yi Xian found that the test was very simple. All they had to do was hit the testing pillar with all their strength. The testing pillar was divided into 4 sections, which represented the 4 levels: Heaven Tier, Sector Tier, Mystic Tier, and Human Tier. As long as the Human Tier lit up, they passed. Yi Xian found that more than 30 people had taken the test since he arrived, but none of them had lit up the Human Tier. Most of them were in their 20s, and the lowest cultivation level was at the Dharma controlling realm. Yi Xian's expression turned serious when he saw this. Even a Dharma controlling realm expert could not light up the human tier of the testing pillar. This showed how strict the Dao Yi Academy was when it came to enrolling students. A Dharma-controlling realm expert in his 20s would be considered a top genius in the firmament world. But here, it was just average. Soon, the number of people taking the test decreased. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then walked up to the round platform. There were 3 people in front of him. Soon, the 2 people in front of him had failed. Yi Xian walked up to the round platform. He thought for a moment, then punched the testing pillar. The testing pillar did not budge. Yi Xian was surprised when he saw this. The testing pillar was more difficult than he had imagined. His punch was equivalent to the peak of the Dharma-controlling realm, but the testing pillar did not budge at all. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then was about to take out his sword when a voice came from behind him. Why doesn't this person have any self-awareness? Yi Xian turned around to see a woman standing in front of him. She was about 18 or 19 years old and wore a lotus leaf dress. She looked pretty, but her lips were thin, making her look mean. Seeing Yi Xian turn around, the woman looked at him coldly. You're only at the Dharma-controlling realm, yet you still want to take the test. People like you are just trying to get lucky. Yi Xian said with a smile, after you. After saying that, he stood to the side. The woman did not step forward, but continued, one must know one's limits. If one doesn't know one's limits, then one is ignorant. Do you understand? Yi Xian said plainly, why do you have so much to say? Hearing this, the woman's eyes turned cold. Say that again? Yi Xian said, I say, why do you have so much to say? The woman suddenly took a step forward, and a powerful pressure suddenly shrouded Yi Xian. True Dharma-controlling realm aura. Yi Xian stood where he was and did not move. He was not affected by the woman's aura at all. Seeing this, the woman frowned slightly. She looked at Yi Xian coldly. So you're holding back? Yi Xian shook his head. You test first. He really had no interest in tangling with a little girl. The woman suddenly walked in front of Yi Xian and looked straight at Yi Xian. Do it. Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. Do it? The woman sneered. Aren't you very powerful? Do it. Yi Xian was a little speechless. What kind of weirdo was this? The woman suddenly shouted furiously. Quickly. Yi Xian thought for a moment. In the next moment, he suddenly vanished on the spot. In the blink of an eye, bang. With a loud explosion, the woman was sent flying. She flew for more than 300 meters. Countless people in the surroundings instantly looked over at the sight of this. To be more precise, they were looking at Yi Xian. 300 m away, the woman glanced at her right hand. Her right palm had split open, and fresh blood was seeping out from it. After a moment of silence, the woman raised her head to look at Yi Xian. I was blind. Looks like you have some ability. Yi Xian shook his head and paid no further attention to the woman. He turned around and walked over to the measurement pillar. Yi Xian grinned as he gazed at the pillar. He opened his right hand, and a sword appeared in his palm. In the next moment, he stabbed it forward. The sword stabbed into the pillar. After a moment of silence, the human section of the measurement pillar lit up before everyone's eyes. Everyone in the surroundings gasped when they witnessed this scene. Since the human segment has lit up, it means that he has passed. However, right at this moment, the profound section above the human section suddenly lit up. Everyone was stunned at the sight of this. At this moment, the section above the human section suddenly lit up. Everyone's eyes opened wide, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. But right at this moment, the heaven section at the top of the measurement pillar suddenly lit up. At this moment, the surroundings were so silent that a falling needle could be heard. Chapter 348. The woman behind Yi Xian gazed at Yi Xian with disbelief, and then she suddenly spoke furiously, impossible. Absolutely impossible. As she spoke, she charged at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly when he witnessed this scene. Suddenly, a furious shout resounded from afar. How dare you! As soon as this voice resounded, a strand of pressure suddenly enveloped the woman, and she was instantly forced to a stop on the spot. Meanwhile, an old man appeared on the round platform. The old man had a very long goatee that reached his chest. The old man glanced coldly at the woman. This is the testing grounds of my Dao Yi Academy. How dare you act as you please? The woman glanced at the old man and was slightly fearful, and then she hurriedly bowed deeply. Greetings, Instructor Feng. The old man paid no attention to the woman, and he gazed at Yi Xian instead. He sized up Yi Xian and asked, a swordsman? Yi Xian bowed slightly. Exactly. The old man asked, the Sword Emperor? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he nodded. As far as he was concerned, it was better to hold back. A wave of gasps instantly resounded in the surroundings when they heard this. The Sword Emperor. Even if such a young Sword Emperor couldn't be considered to be at the top in Dao Yi City, he could be considered to be extremely outstanding. Moreover, swordsman's combat strength was usually extremely formidable. The old man nodded slightly when he heard Yi Xian, a Sword Emperor before the age of 20, and one who has attained the true control realm. He's barely passable. Come with me. As soon as he finished speaking, he was about to lead Yi Xian away. Meanwhile, the woman spoke abruptly, Instructor Feng, I want to be tested as well. Instructor Feng gazed at her, then let's begin. The woman hurriedly walked in front of the testing pillar. She placed her hands on her abdomen and an invisible stream of qi immediately spread out from her body. In the next moment, she let out a soft shout and slammed her palm on the testing pillar. In an instant, the testing pillar trembled slightly. Very quickly, the human segment lit up before everyone's eyes. However, it wasn't over yet. In less than half a breath's time, the segment lit up as well. Just when everyone thought that it was about to end, the heaven segment lit up as well, but it was soon extinguished. The woman's pale face instantly revealed a smile when she witnessed this scene. She hurriedly stood to the side and looked at Instructor Feng. Instructor Feng pondered deeply for a moment, and then he said, "Follow me." Hearing this, the smile on the woman's face instantly became even brighter. At that moment, a man suddenly walked onto the round platform. The man was in his 20s and wore cloth clothes and a pair of iron shoes. With every step he took, a loud and clear sound could be heard. The man walked up to the testing pillar and threw a punch. Boom! In an instant, the entire top of the testing pillar lit up. Heaven tier! Everyone here was shocked and they witnessed this scene, and their eyes were filled with curiosity as they gazed at the man. There was a trace of surprise in Instructor Feng's eyes as well, and he sized up the man and said, "You've cultivated the body?" The man nodded, "Yes." Instructor Feng grinned, "It's rare to be able to cultivate the body to such an extent." "Rare. Come with me." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Yi Xian's group of 3 followed behind him. In next to no time, the 3 of them arrived before a dense forest under Instructor Feng's lead. Instructor Feng stopped moving, and then he turned around to look at Yi Xian's group of 3. Dao Yi Academy is at the end of this mountain range. If all of you are able to pass through this mountain range and arrive at Dao Yi Academy alive, then all of you'll be a member of Dao Yi Academy. Moreover, which class all of you'll be assigned to will depend on your performance. This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "Are there any restrictions?" Instructor Feng said, "There aren't any." As he spoke, he glanced at the 3 of them. However, a word of advice, it's best for the 3 of you to join forces. Of course, I know that people like you are usually extremely conceited, and it's difficult for you to join forces with others, and you won't submit to others. If you don't change, you'll soon suffer. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. After Instructor Feng left, the man in the linen robe walked towards the dense forest in the distance, while the woman glanced at Yi Xian. "I'll definitely arrive before you." As soon as she finished speaking, she also dashed out. The two of them were extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the distance. Yi Xian pondered for a moment, and then flew up on his sword. However, very soon, his expression changed, because a strong pressure suddenly enveloped him. The higher he went, the stronger the pressure became, and in the end, he had no choice but to stop. On the ground, Yi Xian raised his head to take a look. Indeed, things weren't that simple. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian entered the dense forest. The dense forest was very quiet, and in a place like this, the quieter it was, the more it proved that things weren't simple. Yi Xian quickened his pace, and at this moment, there was a sudden tremor in front of him. Very quickly, an enormous demonic beast appeared in front of him. The demonic beast was shaped like a bull, and its entire body was pitch black. Its body was several meters tall, and its four limbs were like pillars, giving off an extremely oppressive feeling. Yi Xian's face was expressionless as he released his own sword intent. When it felt the sword intent, the demonic beast was slightly stunned, and the ferocious light in its eyes gradually became dignified. After a moment, it suddenly turned around and left. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned. Left? It left just like that? After a moment, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Needless to say, it was definitely the domineering aura emitted from his body that deterred the other party. No. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly turned around, and not far in front of him, there was a middle-aged man who appeared out of nowhere. Void-piercing realm. Yi Xian frowned. Was this person sent by Dao Yi Academy? The middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian. You are Yi Xian. Hearing this, Yi Xian's frown deepened. You are not from Dao Yi Academy. The middle-aged man slowly walked towards Yi Xian. We have been looking for you all the way, and it has been very difficult. Yi Xian said in a low voice. Who are you? The middle-aged man said calmly. You don't need to know. Hand over the pagoda. I will spare your life. Prison pagoda. Yi Xian's heart trembled. You are here for the pagoda. The middle-aged man stopped in his tracks and smiled. This pagoda is a great treasure, and if it is in your possession, it will bring you endless trouble. I am helping you, do you understand? Yi Xian said in a low voice. If I give it to you, will you let me go? The middle-aged man nodded. Of course, I want the pagoda, not your life. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, This is Dao Yi Academy. Aren't you afraid of provoking Dao Yi Academy? The middle-aged man smiled. This is only the periphery of Dao Yi Academy, and look around. Yi Xian turned his head to look around, and found that the space around him and the middle-aged man had become blurred, as if it was blocked by something. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. Do you still want to resist? Yi Xian shook his head. No. The middle-aged man smiled, then handed over. Yi Xian nodded, and was about to speak, but at this time, the middle-aged man suddenly disappeared, and when he reappeared, he was already in front of Yi Xian, and at the same time, his palm was already above Yi Xian's head. This chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Yi Xian reacted quickly, and he stomped his right foot and retreated several meters, but the middle-aged man's palm was still above his head. Yi Xian was shocked, but he stopped retreating, and a wave of sword intent swept out of his body. Boom! With a muffled sound, Yi Xian retreated again and again, and this time, he retreated more than 30 meters. In the distance, the middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian. You're strong. With that, he clenched his right hand, and in an instant, the space around his right hand split open, and then rays of pitch-black energy converged towards his right hand. In the next moment, he suddenly shot towards Yi Xian. The space around his right hand began to crack inch by inch wherever it passed. Not far away, Yi Xian was expressionless. He shifted his consciousness slightly, and an illusory sword appeared in front of him in an instant. The Sword of Space. Yi Xian held the sword in his right hand, and thrust it forward. One strike to determine life and death. Another strike. Bang! A figure was blasted flying. It was the middle-aged man. After he flew over 100 m away, he slapped his left hand backwards and relied on the energy of space to stop himself. At this moment, his right hand had vanished. The middle-aged man gazed at Yi Xian with an extremely solemn expression. Fortunately, I didn't underestimate you. Otherwise, that strike from before would have taken my life. Yi Xian walked slowly towards the middle-aged man with his sword in hand. Who exactly are you? The middle-aged man was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he swiftly slapped his palm forward. This slap tore the space in front of him apart, and then a strand of formidable energy converged towards his left hand from that expanse of space before it poured out from his palm. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword arrived before him. Bang! The energy emanated by the middle-aged man's left hand was instantly blasted apart. At the same time, his entire left hand transformed into nothingness. Just as the middle-aged man was about to retreat, Yi Xian's sword suddenly pressed against his forehead. The middle-aged man stared at Yi Xian. You're actually a sword immortal. You. At this moment, Yi Xian's sword suddenly stabbed forward. Chi. The sword directly penetrated the middle-aged man's forehead. Yi Xian sheathed his sword and took out his ethereal expelling ring. Soon, the middle-aged man gradually turned illusory. The middle-aged man stared at Yi Xian, and his face was filled with madness. Yi Xian, if you kill me, there will be thousands of me coming for you. You are bullshit. Yi Xian suddenly slashed with his sword, and the middle-aged man's head directly flew off. Soon, Yi Xian's ethereal expelling ring absorbed the middle-aged man's head, and the surrounding invisible barrier also disappeared. Yi Xian kept the middle-aged man's storage ring. Inside the storage ring, there were 2 heaven-rank spirit artifacts, and in addition, there were also 30,000 purple origin crystals. I've made a small profit. Yi Xian's heart was filled with joy. Soon, he headed off into the distance. About an hour later, the sound of fighting suddenly came from not far in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian's footsteps quickened, and soon, he saw a person. It was the woman from before, and at this moment, this woman was being besieged by 3 demonic beasts. The woman was completely suppressed, and there were injuries all over her body. At this moment, the woman suddenly looked at Yi Xian, and said angrily, "Still not helping?" Chapter 349. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the woman's face turned ashen. However, Yi Xian did not respond to her at all. Instead, he turned around and walked away. It wasn't that he was stingy, but this kind of woman could not be spoiled. He had seen a lot of women like this before. They were all self-centered people who had been spoiled by their families. Such people would never care about other people's feelings, and they were completely self-centered. Yi Xian didn't walk for long when he suddenly stopped. At this time, a beautiful figure rushed in front of him. It was the woman from before. The woman was covered in injuries, and she was glaring at Yi Xian, as though she wanted to kill Yi Xian. Yi Xian said indifferently, "What are you doing?" The woman raged, "You left me in the lurch." Yi Xian was speechless. "Big sister, why should I save you? Have you forgotten? You even wanted to hit me before." The woman said coldly, "You're a man, how can you be so stingy?" Stingy? Yi Xian shook his head and laughed. "It's not stingy, but I don't like you, do you understand? Also, I have no enmity with you, so don't provoke me. Really, after I came here, I've decided to keep a low profile. I don't want to be hunted down in this world, it's too king annoying." At this point, he walked in front of the woman. "Low profile, I want to keep a low profile, do you understand?" Ever since he left Qingcheng, he had not lived a peaceful life. Thus, he wanted to keep a low profile after coming here. Trouble and whatnot, he wanted to reduce it as much as possible. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the woman looked at him coldly, and mocked, "Low profile? Show me how high profile you are. You." Right at this moment, the woman's figure instantly retreated explosively by 300 m, and she just stopped when a sword was pressed against the center of her forehead. The woman was stunned, and her mind went blank. She did not expect that she would not even have the strength to fight back. Yi Xian grinned, "If you provoke me again, I'll beat you to death." With that, he sheathed his sword and walked away. The woman stood there in a daze for a long time before she regained her senses. An hour later, Yi Xian passed through the dense forest and arrived at a canyon. On both sides of the canyon were tall mountains that pierced the clouds. After walking for a while, Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed. He dodged to the back, but just as he dodged, a boulder suddenly fell on his original position. Bang! The entire earth shook violently. Yi Xian turned his head and saw a demonic beast on top of a huge rock on the right side of the mountain. The demonic beast looked like a human with 2 hands and 2 legs. However, its head was like a cow's and its entire body was covered in long fur. The demonic beast glanced at Yi Xian. In the next moment, it leaped and charged directly at Yi Xian. The speed was extremely fast, and it smashed down like a small mountain. At this time, a pitch-black sword sheath appeared behind Yi Xian, and in the next instant, a flying sword flew out from the sheath. In the air, boom! With a loud explosion, the demonic beast retreated hundreds of feet. As soon as it stopped, the ground instantly collapsed. And above its head, there was a sword floating. The demonic beast looked at its chest. On its chest, there was an extremely long sword wound, and its skin had been cut open. The demon beast's expression instantly turned savage when it witnessed this scene. In the next moment, it suddenly stomped its right foot on the ground and shot explosively towards Yi Xian, who was in the distance. Everywhere it passed, waves of violent tremors arose in the space, and it was an extremely shocking sight. At this time, Yi Xian pointed in the air. Chi! A ray of sword light suddenly shot out from his fingertip. In the distance, the demonic beast clenched its right hand into a fist and smashed it forward. This punch instantly shattered Yi Xian's ray of sword light. But at this time, a sword suddenly slashed at its fist. Bang! The demonic beast retreated rapidly. This time, it retreated dozens of feet, and as soon as it stopped, another sword slashed at its head. The demonic beast's pupils constricted. It stomped its right foot on the ground and raised its arms to defend itself. Bang! The ground beneath the demonic beast's feet instantly shattered, and then it shot into the ground. But it didn't take long for it to charge out again. However, it didn't attack again, and it just retreated to the side. At this moment, its eyes were filled with deep fear. Yi Xian paid no attention to the demonic beast and continued walking towards the distance. Meanwhile, the demonic beast slowly clenched its fists. Yi Xian suddenly stopped, and he pointed his sword at the demonic beast. "If you attack again, then I'll kill you." The demonic beast's face instantly became ferocious. How arrogant! As soon as it finished speaking, its arms suddenly bulged, and a powerful force swept out from within its body. Suddenly, a sword flew out from the space in front of the demonic beast. Void flash. The demonic beast hadn't expected that Yi Xian's sword would come and go like a shadow, and it was caught off guard. So, it was instantly struck on the head. Bang! The demonic beast retreated by over 10 steps while it forcefully resisted Yi Xian's attack. The demonic beast looked up at Yi Xian, and then it slammed its right fist towards the ground. Bang! The ground in front of it split open, and a powerful force swept towards Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression turned cold. In the blink of an eye, he opened his right hand, and countless strands of earth energy suddenly converged towards him. In an instant, a golden sword appeared in his right hand. Halran Gaia. Yi Xian suddenly slashed forward with the Halran Gaia in his hand. Bang! Countless strands of earth energy poured out from the tip of his sword, and the might of this attack could truly split open the heavens and the earth. As the sword fell, the power released by the demonic beast in the distance instantly shattered. At the same time, the the demonic beast retreated rapidly, and this time, it retreated by over 100 feet. When it finally stopped, its body split open, and countless amounts of blood and organs poured out onto the ground. Yi Xian walked in front of the demonic beast's corpse, and just as he was about to keep it, a voice sounded from the side, "Leave the corpse behind." Yi Xian turned around, and the person who came was the man in linen clothes from before. Yi Xian grinned, "Why leave it behind?" The man in linen clothes looked straight at Yi Xian, "I want it." Yi Xian's smile grew even brighter, "Reason." The man in linen clothes slowly clenched his right hand, "If you don't give it to me, I'll beat you to death." At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared, and in an instant, countless strands of earth energy suddenly surged in front of the man in linen clothes. Yi Xian had arrived, and his sword had arrived. This sword not only contained the earth energy, but also the good and evil sword intent. Feeling the power of this sword, the man in linen clothes' expression changed, and he took half a step back with his right foot. His right foot stepped on the ground, and his right hand punched forward. The fist and the sword collided. Bang! A shocking explosion suddenly resounded, and at the same time, a figure retreated rapidly. This person was the man in linen clothes. With this retreat, the man in linen clothes retreated over 100 feet, and as soon as he stopped, a sword slashed towards him. Bang! The man in linen clothes instantly retreated over 100 feet, and as soon as he stopped, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. At the same time, a sword silently pressed against his forehead, and Yi Xian was still over 100 feet away. Yi Xian looked at the man in linen clothes, and smiled. He smiled and said, "Do I look like a pushover?" The man in linen clothes stared at Yi Xian, "You hid your strength." Yi Xian walked in front of the man in linen clothes, and sized him up, "You are very calm. Is it because you have something to rely on?" The man in linen clothes stared at Yi Xian, "If you want to kill me, just do it. Why talk so much nonsense?" Yi Xian grinned, and at this moment, a voice came from the side, "Stop." With that, Yi Xian turned to look, and not far away, an old man walked out from a space. A void-piercing realm expert. The old man stared coldly at Yi Xian, "Let him go." Yi Xian smiled, "If I let him go just because you say so, won't I lose face?" The old man narrowed his eyes, and a cold glint flickered in his eyes. "Do you know who you are talking to?" Yi Xian smiled, "I don't know." The old man slowly clenched his right hand, "Old man, I will give you one last chance, let him go, or else, you can forget about entering Dao Yi Academy for the rest of your life." Yi Xian nodded, "I understand, you are from Dao Yi Academy." The old man said coldly, "Let him go." Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then said, "I think we should talk reason, it's him." At this moment, the old man suddenly roared, "Old man doesn't want to listen to your nonsense, hurry up and let him go." With that, he took a step forward, and a powerful pressure swept towards Yi Xian. At this time, Yi Xian held the sword in his right hand and stabbed forward. Chi! The man in linen clothes was directly pierced through. Blood splattered. Seeing this scene, the old man was stunned. The man in linen clothes in front of Yi Xian also widened his eyes in disbelief, but it quickly turned into regret. He knew that he had met a tough opponent. The reason for his regret was that things didn't have to develop to this point. Of course, he hadn't expected that Yi Xian would dare to kill him after the old man appeared. He hadn't expected this at all. After the man in linen clothes was killed by Yi Xian, the old man was stunned. In the next moment, he ran to the man in linen clothes, and tears flowed down his face as he looked at the man's corpse. "Grandfather told you that you could directly enter Dao Yi Academy, and there was no need for you to take the test. You just wouldn't listen. You just wouldn't listen." With that, he suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian, and his expression was ferocious, "You deserve death. You deserve death." As soon as he finished speaking, he shot towards Yi Xian. In the distance, Yi Xian charged forward with his sword in hand, and then he slashed down. One strike to decide life and death. his sword descended. Bang! An explosion resounded like a clap of thunder. Yi Xian and the old man separated as soon as they collided, and both of them retreated by over 30 m. When the old man stopped moving, he looked at Yi Xian with disbelief. Obviously, he hadn't expected Yi Xian to be so strong. Yi Xian spoke indifferently. What? Can a teacher of Dao Yi Academy attack anyone who comes to take the test? The old man retorted angrily. You killed someone in my Dao Yi Academy. As a teacher of Dao Yi Academy, I naturally have the right to punish you. Yi Xian suddenly interrupted the old man. What? You're going to bullshit me now? I wanted to tell you that you and your grandson were very arrogant, weren't you? Didn't you refuse to listen? Now, I don't want to tell you, and I don't want to listen. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged towards the old man. Chapter 350. The old man was instantly stunned when he saw Yi Xian attack. In the next moment, his expression became extremely gloomy while killing intent surged explosively within his eyes. The old man opened his right hand. In an instant, the space before him split apart, and then countless strands of dark energy converged towards the center of his palm. Stop! Right at this moment, a furious shout suddenly resounded in the air, and then a figure suddenly appeared between Yi Xian and the old man. The person who had come was none other than Instructor Feng. Yi Xian had stopped, but the energy contained within his sword was still present, and the energy in the old man's hand hadn't vanished as well. Instructor Feng glanced at the two of them, and then he looked at the old man in the end. Brother Mu Chang, what are you doing? The old man called Mu Chang spoke coldly. Why are you asking me what I'm doing? Why don't you ask him what he did? Instructor Feng frowned slightly. Suddenly, he turned around, and his face sank when he saw the corpse of the man in plain clothes and not too far away. After that, he turned around to look at Yi Xian. You did this? Yi Xian nodded. Instructor Feng stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Why did you do this? Yi Xian said, I killed a demon beast earlier, and he wanted to take it from me. I didn't give it to him, so he wanted to beat me to death. So, I killed him. Instructor Feng glanced at the nearby demon beast's corpse when he heard this. Instructor Feng immediately turned around to look at Yi Xian when he saw the demon beast's corpse. You killed it? Yi Xian nodded. Instructor Feng glanced deeply at Yi Xian. That demon beast was at the true Imperial Magus realm, and it wasn't just the true Imperial Magus realm. Because under normal circumstances, demon beasts were much stronger than humans of the same realm of cultivation. Yet such a demon beast had been killed by Yi Xian. Moreover, Yi Xian was able to fight Mu Chang without losing. Obviously, Yi Xian had concealed his strength. Meanwhile, Mu Chang spoke abruptly. Feng Jing, what do you intend to do? Feng Jing glanced at Mu Chang and spoke indifferently. What do you think I should do? Mu Chang said coldly, of course it's to execute him immediately. Feng Jing was expressionless. Mu Chang, your grandson made the first move. Hearing this, Mu Chang's expression instantly became somewhat ferocious. Feng Jing, are you going to protect him? Feng Jing shook his head. I'm not trying to cover for him. You should know our rules. In this test, you are responsible for your own life and death. Your grandson wanted to kill someone to steal the treasure. Unfortunately, he wasn't strong enough and was killed instead. You can't blame others for this. Mu Chang stared at Feng Jing. You Feng Jing, just you wait. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. And you, no matter who you are, the old man will kill you. With that, he turned around and disappeared into the horizon. On the spot, Feng Jing glanced at Yi Xian. In the future, there will be endless troubles. Yi Xian smiled and said, it's fine, I've always had a lot of troubles. Feng Jing shook his head. Young man, you should think thrice before you act. You shouldn't act so quickly. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I'll remember senior's words. Feng Jing shook his head slightly. The old man knew that you're not a person who knows your place at first sight. Remember, after entering Dao E Academy, if you don't change your character, you'll suffer greatly. Yi Xian smiled, I won't cause trouble, but if others want to provoke me, I won't do it either. Feng Jing said indifferently, sometimes, it's not a bad thing to be bullied. Come with me. With that, he turned around and left. Yi Xian shrugged his shoulders, put away the demon beast's corpse, and then followed Feng Jing. Soon, under Feng Jing's lead, Yi Xian passed through many mountains. Along the way, Yi Xian's expression was solemn. Because he sensed some powerful auras in those mountains. Some of these auras were obscure, but they were extremely powerful. About half an hour later, Yi Xian, to continue this chapter, please turn the page. Under Feng Jing's lead, they came to a grand canyon. In the depths of the canyon, he saw a huge castle. The castle was built against a mountain, and there were mountains on both sides and behind it. Above the castle, there was an illusory giant seal. Yi Xian said softly, is that Dao E Academy? The old man nodded, the outer court. The outer court? Yi Xian looked at Feng Jing, and the inner court? Feng Jing nodded, of course. But ordinary people can't enter the inner court. Yi Xian quickly asked, what do you mean? Feng Jing said indifferently, our Dao E Academy recruits top geniuses from various worlds. Those who can enter the outer court are all super monsters. Only 1 or 2 of these super monstrous geniuses are allowed to enter the inner court every year. Inner court. Yi Xian nodded and looked at the castle not far away. He did not know if Anlanxiao and Ling were in the outer court or the inner court. Soon, both of them entered the castle. There were very few people in the castle. No, he did not see many people. Yi Xian looked around curiously. It was very quiet, which was different from what he had imagined. Feng Jing said indifferently, it's quiet now, but it'll be lively at night. You're not in Dao E Academy yet, but if you're still alive 3 days later, you will be. Then, he turned and disappeared on the spot. Yi Xian stood on the spot, dumbfounded. Still alive tomorrow? There was a deep meaning behind those words. Yi Xian thought for a while and looked around. It was very quiet. After a while, Yi Xian shook his head, we'll deal with it when it comes. With that, he found an empty spot and sat down. Yi Xian sank his consciousness into his body. In the prison pagoda, Shaoling was already asleep, and the great god on the second floor was doing something. He was hiding in the second floor every day. Yi Xian came to the third floor, which was empty. Chaos Qi. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian hurriedly withdrew his consciousness. He circulated his aura, and soon, the chaos qi began to wander around his body. Yi Xian carefully felt his body. Gradually, he found that his body was a little different from before. However, he did not know what was different. Sensing the chaotic energy in his body, Yi Xian knew that this chaotic energy was not simple at all. As if he had thought of something, he opened his palm and the chaos qi suddenly appeared in his palm. When the chaos qi appeared, the spiritual energy around him suddenly gathered towards him. Not only the spiritual energy around him, but the spiritual energy between heaven and earth also began to change. Yi Xian was greatly alarmed when he noticed this, and he hurriedly withdrew that wisp of chaotic energy. This chaos qi could actually attract the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? After a while, Yi Xian said softly, it seems like I'll have to find some time to study this chaos qi. Apart from the chaos qi, there was another thing, the Tao law of the second floor. Until now, he still did not know what the second Tao law was. He only knew that it was related to dreams. This Tao law could silently destroy the entire Qinyu sect, so there was no doubt about its ability. However, this Tao law had a trace of intelligence of its own, so it ignored him. Therefore, there were many times when he wanted to study it, but he could not. The other party did not cooperate at all. Otherwise, if the second Tao law condensed into a sword, its strange ability would definitely be 10 times more terrifying than instant space. Unfortunately, the other party did not cooperate, and he did not dare to force it because he was not confident that he could deal with it. Before he knew it, the sky had turned dark. When the sky was completely dark, Yi Xian suddenly stood up and went to the city wall. At this moment, he realized that there were two people on both sides of the city wall that he was standing on. Both of them were men in their 20s. Both of them looked nervous. Both of them had extremely solemn expressions on their faces. Both of them were extremely solemn. Yi Xian raised his head and looked into the distance. The ground nearby suddenly trembled as if something was rushing towards him. It was a demon beast. Yi Xian secretly raised his guard. Naturally, he would not underestimate it. This was not the firmament world. These places were really full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons, so he had to be more careful. Soon, over 10 demon beasts arrived before the castle and charged directly into it. At this moment, Yi Xian realized that the gate of the castle was open. At this moment, one of the demon beasts leaped onto the city wall and pounced towards him. With a thought from Yi Xian, a sword flew out from the sword case behind him. Boom! The demon beast was directly sent flying. After the demon beast stopped, it looked at Yi Xian with a trace of fear in its eyes, but it did not retreat. Instead, it continued charging towards Yi Xian. This time, its speed was even faster, like a bolt of lightning, almost invisible to the naked eye. As for Yi Xian, he felt like a small mountain was pressing down on him. Not daring to be careless, Yi Xian stomped his right foot and his entire body rose from the ground. Then, he held the sword with both hands and slashed downwards. Boom! Along with a howl of pain, the demon beast was directly blasted away. This time, it was sent flying more than 300 meters away. The demon beast struggled on the ground for a while before getting up. After getting up, it looked deeply at Yi Xian, turned around, and ran. Yi Xian was stunned. It ran away just like that? Are you a swordsman? Meanwhile, a voice resounded from Yi Xian's left side. Yi Xian turned around and saw a woman walking towards him. She wore a tight dress, had a very thin waist, and 2 short swords hung on both sides of her waist. Moreover, her appearance was extremely beautiful. Her features were exquisite as if they were carved with the finest detail, and it was extremely pleasing to the eye. Yi Xian nodded. A swordsman. The woman walked over to Yi Xian, sized Yi Xian up, and then said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Helian Xian." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Yi Xian." Helian Xian turned around and glanced towards the distance. There were almost 20 demon beasts in the distance, and they were besieging over a dozen people. Helian Xian spoke abruptly, "These demon beasts are very smart. They won't attack people who pose a lethal threat to them." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Is it us?" Helian Xian nodded. "Before you came, there were 32 people in the city. Now, there are only a dozen left, and more will disappear when the sun rises." Yi Xian spoke in a deep voice, "Is it worth it to lose your life just to enter the Dao Yi Academy?" Helian Xian spoke indifferently, "Entering the Dao Yi Academy isn't just a symbol of status, but also some resources that are difficult to obtain in the outside world." Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, a man was suddenly sent flying. Yi Xian was about to help, but Helian Xian suddenly stopped him. Yi Xian looked at Helian Xian with a puzzled expression, and the latter spoke calmly, "This is his own choice. He can give up at any time, but he didn't do so. Because he knows that if he does so, it will be difficult for him to take even half a step forward in his life. And if you make a move, it is equivalent to destroying his state of mind." Yi Xian thought about it and was about to speak, but at this moment, 3 demon beasts suddenly rushed into the city, and these 3 demon beasts actually rushed directly towards Yi Xian. Their target was clear. Moreover, these 3 demon beasts were not at the true defensive realm, but at the void-piercing realm. Yi Xian's expression instantly darkened. P.S. Those of you who keep an eye on the social circle should know that I've been targeted by someone who sells porn recently. Every time I delete a post, it'll pop up again in less than 10 seconds. I swear, I really haven't browsed any messy and dirty websites. I am a pure person. End of this chapter. Chapter 351. Seeing these three demonic beasts rushing over, Yi Xian knew that he was being targeted. And the first person he thought of was Mu Chang from before. In this place, he had no other enemies. Yi Xian didn't think too much, because the three void-piercing realm demonic beasts had already rushed in front of him. Yi Xian stepped on the ground, and a sword instantly condensed between the earth. In the next moment, he rushed forward, holding the sword with both hands, and slashed forward. A golden sword chi flashed down in the night sky. Rumble. The leading demonic beast was directly sent flying by the sword, but in the next moment, Yi Xian was also directly sent flying, directly outside the city wall. In the air, Yi Xian gently pressed down with his right hand, and his whole body suddenly stopped. On the city wall, the three demonic beasts stared at him. The three demonic beasts were huge, shaped like wolves, with 2 feet and 2 wings. Yi Xian looked at the demonic beast in the middle that he had slashed with his sword, and the other party actually had no injuries. What a strong defense. Yi Xian's face darkened. Fighting with demonic beasts of this level was undoubtedly the most troublesome, because the other party's physical body was too strong. At this moment, the three demonic beasts were about to rush out again, but Yi Xian turned around and ran. Seeing Yi Xian run, the three demonic beasts were stunned. Not only were the three demonic beasts stunned, but even Helian Xian, who was ready to watch a good show on the city wall, was stunned. Run? Just like that? Yi Xian didn't run outside, but ran into the city. He ran very fast, and in the blink of an eye, he disappeared from the city. After the three demonic beasts were stunned, they hurriedly chased after him. However, they couldn't catch up to Yi Xian at all. Although Yi Xian was only at the true imperial law realm, his strength was not weaker than theirs. Moreover, he had the Tao of space, and with the imperial sword technique, his speed could be said to be much faster than the two demonic beasts. Therefore, the three beasts could not catch up to Yi Xian at all. Yi Xian circled around the city. He didn't want to fight, so the three demonic beasts had nowhere to use their strength. Just like that, the sky gradually brightened. Within the city, the demonic beasts began to retreat. On top of the city wall, Yi Xian stood quietly. Not far from him were the three demonic beasts. The three demonic beasts glared at him. One of the demonic beasts said in a sinister voice, "Human, are you such a coward?" "Coward?" Yi Xian laughed and said, "You're 3 against 1, and you're telling me you're scared? If you have the ability, fight me one-on-one. Do you dare?" One-on-one. The expressions of the three demonic beasts darkened. From the start till now, they realized that this human in front of them was quite strong. Very strong. If it was a one-on-one battle, they had no confidence that they could kill Yi Xian. And if it wasn't a one-on-one battle, Yi Xian would not fight them. As the sky grew brighter, the leading demonic beast suddenly said, "If you want to fight one-on-one, sure. We'll fight one-on-one with you tonight." With that, the three demonic beasts turned around and disappeared outside the city. On top of the city wall, Yi Xian was expressionless. No one knew what he was thinking. At this time, Helian Xian walked to his side. "Did you offend someone?" Yi Xian nodded. "It should be that Mu Chang." Mu Chang. Helian Xian's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. She looked at Yi Xian and said, "How did you offend him?" Yi Xian laughed and said, "I killed his grandson." Helian Xian blinked and said, "Then you're in big trouble." Mu Chang is the outer court principal instructor of Dao Yi Academy. He has a lot of power in the outer court. Yi Xian laughed and said, "I can't do anything about it." Although he wanted to keep a low profile and did not want to cause trouble, He would not allow anyone to bully him for no reason. As long as he was alive, why should he swallow his anger? Moreover, this was the way of the world. Most of the time, it was useless to reason with others. Strength was everything. Helian Xian glanced at Yi Xian and said, I hope you'll still be here in a few days. With that, she turned around and left. After Helian Xian left, Yi Xian looked around and saw 2 or 3 corpses on the ground. Yi Xian was silent. He knew that Dao Yi Academy might be testing their combat strength. Most of the time, one's realm did not represent their combat strength. This was because one's realm could be increased by using external objects, but one's combat strength was real. Being able to survive in this city meant that one's strength was not exaggerated at all. From this, it could be seen that those who had joined Dao Yi Academy were freaks. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and sat cross-legged on the ground. He sank his consciousness into his body and tried to come into contact with the second Dao law. However, as usual, the second Dao law ignored him. He was speechless. Yi Xian felt helpless. At that moment, he suddenly thought of something and hurriedly looked for Xiaolinger. At that moment, Xiaolinger was lying on a spirit fruit the size of a watermelon. Her eyes were closed and she was drooling. Yi Xian shook Xiaolinger gently. Xiaolinger, wake up. There was no movement. Yi Xian shook her again. Suddenly, Xiaolinger opened her eyes. She looked at Yi Xian and blinked before closing them again. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Don't sleep. I need your help. Xiaolinger changed her position, covered her ears with her hands and continued to sleep. Yi Xian was speechless. What was the meaning of this? He shook her again and was about to speak when Xiaolinger suddenly opened her eyes and glared at Yi Xian. You're so annoying. Yi Xian was speechless. Xiaolinger continued to sleep. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Xiaolinger, do me a favor and I'll give you a lot of spirit fruits. Xiaolinger's eyes lit up when she heard that. She stared at Yi Xian. Really? Yi Xian nodded. Really? Xiaolinger glanced at Yi Xian. The sister on the 2nd floor and the sister on the 4th floor said that you're especially good at bluffing and thick-skinned, so they can't trust you easily. You should give me the fruit first. Yi Xian's face darkened. Was he such a person in the eyes of the goddess on the 2nd floor? No. Yi Xian suddenly came to his senses. The sister on the 4th floor? He hurriedly looked at Xiaolinger. The sister on the 4th floor is the same? Xiaolinger blinked. Is that so? Yi Xian said, You said it. Xiaolinger was a little confused. I didn't say it. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. This girl. Sometimes she looked stupid, but sometimes she was cunning. Yi Xian didn't dwell on this issue. He took out some spirit fruits and handed them to Xiaolinger. Seeing the spirit fruits, Xiaolinger immediately beamed. Yi Xian smiled. Do you remember the treasure you brought in last time? Xiaolinger nodded. She seemed to have thought of something. She looked at Yi Xian warily. What are you going to do? Yi Xian smiled. Nothing. I just hope it can cooperate with me. I want to make a sword, a very, very powerful sword. Upon hearing this, Xiaolinger immediately became interested. She said excitedly, A very, very powerful sword? Yi Xian nodded. That's right. Xiaolinger suddenly turned around and flew away. Soon, a series of tinkling sounds came from the 2nd floor. A few dozen breaths later, Xiaolinger appeared again. In front of Yi Xian, and in her arms, she was holding a small, Meng character. The dream character was grayish-white and was currently trembling. The Dream Dao Law. Yi Xian was also afraid of the Dream Dao Law because its ability was too strange. Xiaolinger handed the Dao Law to Yi Xian. Do it yourself. Yi Xian placed his hand on the Dao Law. As soon as he touched it, he felt the world spin around him, but it quickly returned to normal. Xiao Linger gazed at Yi Xian with a brilliant smile on her face. Yi Xian received the Dao Law. It didn't resist this time. It hesitated for a moment and said, I want to use you as a medium to condense a special sword. You don't have any objections, right? The dream Dao trembled lightly as if it was replying. Yi Xian was delighted. Then I'll begin. As soon as he finished speaking, he sat cross-legged on the ground and spread his hands apart. It didn't take long for the dream Dao to slowly float to the center of his brows. It didn't take long for a mysterious force to suddenly appear in front of Yi Xian. This force was extremely mysterious, or it should be said to be extremely strange. Because it couldn't be seen or borne, and one could only sense it. Yi Xian was quite excited. Because he felt that this might be the energy of dreams. If it was condensed into a sword, then wouldn't it be able to enter the dreams of others? A dream sword. Just the thought of it was exciting. Yi Xian started to control this force. Unlike what he'd imagined, it wasn't very difficult to control this force. It didn't take long for the tip of a sword to condense. The tip of the sword was grayish-white and slightly resembled mist. Meanwhile, Xiao Linger was cheering incessantly from the side. Gradually, the body of the sword was condensed. Even though it was slightly strenuous, it was much easier than condensing the major Dao Law and spatial Dao Law. Before long, the body of the sword was completely condensed. It wasn't just the body, even the hilt had appeared. Around 10 minutes later, a grayish-white sword appeared in his hand. Yi Xian was slightly excited as he gazed at the sword in his hand. The dream sword. Haha. After laughing for a while, he seemed to have thought of something, and he suddenly frowned. Something wasn't right. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and his expression quickly changed because he'd realized what was wrong. From the beginning until now, the dream Dao Law hadn't resisted at all. Not only had it not resisted, but it was even cooperating with him. This was absolutely not normal. It was too smooth. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian's face turned pale. He glanced at the surroundings and noticed that everything was the same. Xiao Linger was still there, and she was staring excitedly at the sword in his hand. Normal. Very, very normal. However, an instinctive voice told him that this wasn't normal. Enlightened sword heart. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly slashed forward with the sword in his hand. Hiss. Something seemed to have been torn apart in front of him, and it didn't take long for the surroundings to become illusory. After a short moment, the surroundings returned to normal. Meanwhile, Xiao Linger was staring curiously at him in front of him, and she was still holding the dream Dao Law in her hand. Yi Xian instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this. So it was really just a dream. Yi Xian glanced at the dream Dao Law, and after a moment of silence, he grinned. I'll condense it in the future. As soon as he finished speaking, he left the prison pagoda. After he left the prison pagoda, Yi Xian was suddenly stunned on the spot. Because he'd noticed that something was still slightly off. Chapter 352. Something was wrong. Yi Xian's expression was gloomy. Everything around him was normal, but his heart told him that something was wrong. As for what was wrong, he didn't know. Was he still in a dream? Thinking of this, Yi Xian's expression turned ugly. If he was still in a dream, then it would be too terrifying. God on the second floor. Yi Xian hurried to the second floor and found God on the second floor. God on the second floor looked at him and didn't speak. Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Is this a dream?" God on the second floor frowned. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then he turned and left. Outside the prison pagoda, Yi Xian looked around. After a moment of silence, he suddenly pulled out his sword and slashed forward. Chi! A ray of sword light flew out. The ground in the distance split open, so deep that one couldn't see the bottom. Nothing changed around him. Not in a dream? Yi Xian was puzzled. At this moment, a voice came from beside him. What are you doing? Yi Xian turned to look. The person was Helian Xian. Helian Xian walked in front of Yi Xian. She looked at the gully in front of Yi Xian, then looked at Yi Xian. What happened? Yi Xian looked at Helian Xian in front of him. This person in front of him was so real. If this was really a dream, then this way of dreams was a little too terrifying. If he wasn't in a dream, he felt something was wrong. This feeling was getting stronger and stronger. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. Soon, his sword intent spread out in all directions. Through the sword intent, he felt this world. The sword intent went further and further away. Real. Through the sword intent, he felt everything was very, very real. Even when he looked at the world with his sword eyes, there was nothing wrong with it. But he believed in his intuition. About 2 hours later, the surrounding sword intent suddenly gathered towards him. Yi Xian opened his eyes. 2 rays of sword light shot out from his eyes. Bewildered. At this moment, Yi Xian was at a loss. Because through the perception of his sword intent, he still hadn't noticed anything wrong with this world. Could it be that his intuition was wrong? This thought appeared in Yi Xian's mind. At this moment, a thunderous voice sounded in his mind. Come out. As soon as this voice sounded, Yi Xian felt as if his head had been struck by lightning. He felt a wave of dizziness. After an unknown period of time, he gradually woke up. At the moment, he was in the World Prison Pagoda, and in front of him was Xiao Linger. In addition to Xiao Linger, there was also God from the second floor. The Almighty on the second floor was looking at him coldly. Xiao Linger held the Dream Dao Law with a puzzled look on his face. Yi Xian said solemnly, I entered a dream, right? The Almighty on the second floor stared at Yi Xian. You're really ignorant. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. The Almighty on the second floor said, given your ant-like strength, you actually wanted to control the Dream Dao Law with a trace of spiritual intelligence. Was your head struck by lightning? How could you do such a stupid thing? Yi Xian smiled bitterly. How would I have known it would be so terrifying? The Almighty on the second floor looked at him coldly. Terrifying? If the spiritual intelligence of the Dao Law and the Space Dao Law hadn't been asleep, do you think you could control them? Which one of the people upstairs isn't a supreme powerhouse in the world? Why aren't they locked up inside? Apart from the pagoda's seal, there's another reason. It's because of these Dao laws. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. The Almighty on the second floor glanced at Yi Xian and shook his head. You don't understand. You still can't understand the true terror of these Dao laws. Just like this Dream Dao Law, if it's at its peak, it can make everyone in the world fall into a deep sleep, never to wake up again. Yi Xian's heart trembled. This pagoda had a total of 9 floors. In other words, there were 9 such powerful Dao laws. Here came the problem. Who was the one who collected these Dao laws? In other words, how strong was the original owner of this pagoda? The Almighty on the second floor didn't say anything else. She left the first floor. After the Almighty left, Xiao Ling giggled. You've been scolded. Yi Xian was speechless. He ignored Xiao Ling and left the prison pagoda. At this moment, the sky was already dark. Yi Xian got up and went to the city wall. In the distance, more than 10 powerful auras rushed over. They're here again. The expressions of the people on the city wall instantly turned serious. Soon, more than 10 demonic beasts rushed into the city. Not long after, sounds of fighting could be heard from within the city. Below the city wall, there were 3 demonic beasts. These 3 demonic beasts were all at the void-piercing realm. The 3 demonic beasts looked at Yi Xian on the city wall. Yi Xian jumped off the city wall and walked towards the 3 demonic beasts. Who's next? The leading demonic beast walked out and looked directly at Yi Xian. Human, you're very confident. Yi Xian smiled. I want to find out something. Did Mu Chang send you here? The demonic beast said indifferently, so what if I did? So what if I didn't? Yi Xian nodded. That's true. Then let's fight first. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. The demonic beast also disappeared on the spot. In the next moment, boom! An explosion suddenly resounded, and then both of them retreated explosively. At the same time that Yi Xian retreated, a flying sword suddenly slashed out from the sword chest on his back. The sword was extremely swift, and it instantly arrived before the demonic beast. The demonic beast's pupils constricted slightly, and it swiftly raised its arms to block it. Bang! The sword was blocked flying, but the demonic beast was instantly pushed back by over 100 m. As soon as it stopped moving, Yi Xian suddenly appeared above it. In the next moment, a ray of sword light slashed down from the top of its head. A single strike to decide life and death. The demonic beast's expression instantly changed drastically. It stomped its right foot on the ground and punched the sky with its right fist. Bang! A powerful force swept out from its fist, and it instantly drowned Yi Xian's sword. Rumble. The entire ground suddenly trembled violently, and then the demonic beast retreated explosively. This time, it retreated for over 600 m. As soon as it stopped moving, a sword was pressed against the center of its forehead. The surroundings fell silent. The demonic beast stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Do it. Yi Xian shook his head and put his sword away. There's no enmity between us, so why would I kill you? As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. The demonic beast behind him spoke in a low voice, Human. Yi Xian stopped moving, and then he turned around to gaze at the demonic beast. What? Do you still want to fight? The demonic beast shook its head. I've lost. As it spoke, it gazed at Yi Xian. You really won't kill me? Yi Xian asked, Is there some deep enmity between us? The demonic beast shook its head. Yi Xian smiled, then it settled. However, if you attack me again, I won't be lenient anymore. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Meanwhile, the demonic beast suddenly said, Someone within the academy wants you dead. Yi Xian stopped moving and said, I know. It's Mu Chang, right? The demonic beast spoke in a low voice, I can't tell you. Yi Xian smiled as he asked, Then can you tell me what benefits he gave you? The demonic beast hesitated for a moment before it said, 5,000 violet origin crystals, 5,000 violet origin crystals. Yi Xian was stunned. 4,000 violet origin crystals are enough to hire 3 myriad void realm demonic beasts? It's that cheap. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he flicked his finger, causing a spatial ring to fall in front of the demonic beast. The demonic beast glanced at Yi Xian. What's this? Yi Xian smiled. It's a small token of my appreciation. The demonic beast glanced at the spatial ring, and there was a total of 10,000 violet origin crystals within it. It looked at Yi Xian. What's the meaning of this? Yi Xian said, Make friends? The demonic beast fell silent for a moment, and then it said, You're a good person, and I'm willing to make friends with you. However, I don't want these violet origin crystals. As soon as it finished speaking, the spatial ring flew back to Yi Xian. Lienda added, You have to be careful. That person won't let you go. We'll have many more opportunities to meet after we enter the academy. Chapter 353. The woman on the pillar stared at the old man. She did not speak. The old man sneered sarcastically. Duge Xian, you used to be the most dazzling goddess of the never-ending star region. But now, you have fallen to such a state. How do you feel? The woman did not speak. The old man's smile turned cold. Not only did you abandon yourself and have an affair with someone else, but you also gave birth to an evil spawn. You even gave the Dugu family's treasure to that evil spawn. You, the woman on the pillar suddenly looked at the old man expressionlessly. That treasure belongs to his father, not the Dugu family. The old man's expression suddenly turned ferocious. His father? Dugu Xian, do you know that the Dugu family offended the Gu family because you had an affair with someone else? The Gu family has been targeting us ever since. The woman said mildly, if the Dugu family was strong, would others dare to bully us? You blame others for your own problems. Great elder, it has been so many years, but you have not improved at all. The old man stared at the woman. After a while, he suddenly laughed. Dugu Xian, this old man is not going to argue with you. I came here today to tell you that we already know the whereabouts of your two evil spawn. Soon, you and your mother will be reunited. With that, he turned and left. Behind him, the woman suddenly said, the Dugu family's blood flows in their veins. The old man stopped and sneered. These evil spawns have the Dugu family's blood flowing in their veins. That is an insult to the Dugu family. With that, the old man disappeared on the spot. On the pillar, the woman slowly closed her eyes. After a while, she said softly, Xian, Ling, After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian opened his eyes. At that moment, he was already on the top of a mountain. Behind him was a bottomless cliff. On his left and right were the people who had come out of the city with him. At that moment, they were all looking around curiously. Soon, they looked up into the distance. On a small hill in the distance, there were many bamboo houses. At a glance, there were about 30 of them. Some were big, some were small. A student suddenly asked, Tutor Feng, is this the outer yard? Feng Jing said mildly, why? Is it different from what you imagined? Everyone nodded. The outer court of Dao Yi Academy was too simple. Feng Jing said indifferently, do you know those bamboo houses? Everyone shook their heads. Feng Jing said indifferently, you must rely on your own strength to build a bamboo house that belongs to you. As for why, you will know very soon. As he spoke, he glanced at the crowd. From now on, all of you are Dao Yi Academy's outer court students. However, this is only temporary because we don't know how long you'll be able to stay here. Next, Instructor Wu Yuan will be the one to receive you. Good luck. With that, he turned around and disappeared. Instructor Wu Yuan? Just as Feng Jing left, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of everyone. The middle-aged man wore a loose hemp robe and his long hair draped over his shoulders. He exuded a pungent smell of alcohol. Wu Yuan glanced at Yi Xian and the others. Build a bamboo house of your own within 3 days. Otherwise, get lost. With that, he turned around and left. At this moment, a student suddenly asked, Instructor Wu, how do we build this bamboo house? Wu Yuan did not even turn his head, think of a way yourself. On the spot, everyone looked at each other. Meanwhile, Helian Xian suddenly turned around and walked to the cliff behind her. She bent down to look, and it didn't take long for her brows to knit together. There were many bamboos growing on the cliff. At this moment, the others noticed this as well. Meanwhile, a man suddenly leaped down, and it didn't take long for him to descend onto a cliff. He grabbed a long bamboo and was just about to leave, and a black shadow suddenly shot up from the bottom of the cliff. The man's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly retreated. However, the black shadow was truly too swift, and it arrived before him in the blink of an eye. Bang! An explosion suddenly resounded from below. Before everyone's eyes, the black shadow disappeared, and with it, the man disappeared as well. Everyone's expressions instantly became solemn when they witnessed this scene. Because until now, they still hadn't seen the black shadow's face clearly. Yi Xian's expression was rather solemn as well. The black shadow was too fast, so fast that even he was slightly fearful. It seems like the bamboo house won't be easy to build. Moreover, they had to build a bamboo house within 3 days. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he stood out. Should we join forces? All of them looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, we have a total of 10 people. How about 8 of us deal with the black shadow at the bottom of the cliff while the other 2 take the bamboo? That way, everyone will be safe. All of them exchanged glances. Meanwhile, one of the men suddenly said, can we join forces? Yi Xian smiled. Instructor Wu didn't say that we can't join forces. The man thought for a moment and said, right. As he spoke, he glanced at all of them. What do all of you think? In next to no time, all of them nodded and expressed that they had no objections. Yi Xian nodded, and then he looked at Helian Xian. You and I will be the vanguard. Helian Xian nodded, no problem. The 2 of them leaped down, and the 8 people behind them followed closely behind. At the instant that the 8 of them jumped down, a black shadow shot into the sky from the bottom of the cliff once more, and it was extremely swift. In midair, Yi Xian suddenly slashed down with the sword in his right hand, and a bright ray of light slashed down from the tip of his sword. Bang! The black shadow was forced to a stop, but in the next moment, the black shadow suddenly dispersed. Then, a ferocious exotic beast appeared in front of Yi Xian. This beast had the head of a snake, the body of a dog, and a ferocious and extremely ugly appearance. The beast roared at Yi Xian, and then it suddenly charged towards Yi Xian. Its speed far surpassed that of a bolt of lightning, and even Yi Xian was only able to see a blurry trajectory. Yi Xian was just about to attack when a black whip suddenly descended onto the beast's head. Bang! The beast was directly smashed down by the whip, and the others attacked successively as well. In next to no time, the beast was completely suppressed, and the other 2 cut the bamboo like madmen. However, it wasn't long before an ear-piercing cry suddenly resounded from the bottom of the cliff, and then almost 30 black shadows suddenly charged out from the bottom of the cliff. The expressions of Yi Xian and the others changed when they witnessed this scene, and they hurriedly retreated explosively. In next to no time, all of them retreated to the top of the cliff, and those beasts didn't pursue them. These beasts stared fixedly at Yi Xian and the others while emitting extremely ear-piercing cries. Yi Xian wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead. Aren't there a little too many demon beasts? Is this Dao Yi Academy? Why are there so many formidable demon beasts in the academy? In next to no time, those beasts returned to the bottom of the abyss, and all of them instantly heaved sighs of relief when they saw this scene. Right at this moment, a ridiculing laughter suddenly resounded from behind them. Join forces? If you all join forces, those demon beasts won't join forces? Everyone turned to look, and a man was walking towards them. The man was about 20 years old, wearing a white robe, and held a long spear in his hand. The man glanced at Yi Xian and the others. This is a test, and for those demon beasts, it's a kind of training. You all ganged up on them, but they also ganged up on you, and they even outnumbered you. You want to take a shortcut here? Impossible. With that, he leaped and directly jumped off the cliff. His speed was extremely fast, and in an instant, he landed on a mountain wall. His right hand held a long bamboo, and with a light stomp of his left foot, his whole body shot up into the sky. At this moment, a strange beast suddenly rushed up from below, and pounced towards him. The man laughed coldly, and with his left hand holding the long spear, he fiercely threw it in the air. Boom! The strange beast was directly blasted back by the spear, and the man had already appeared in front of Yi Xian and the others. With a wave of his left hand, a long spear shot up from below the cliff, and finally landed firmly in his hand. The man glanced at Yi Xian and the others. The size of the bamboo house determines your status in the outer court, and this status determines how many benefits you can obtain. With that, he turned around and left. On the spot, everyone looked at each other, and a moment later, they all separated, and then each began to retrieve a bamboo. Yi Xian also jumped off the cliff, and he landed on a protruding stone wall. Just as he was about to retrieve a bamboo, a powerful aura suddenly swept over from below. Yi Xian slightly frowned, and he raised his sword and slashed downwards. Chi! A ray of sword light fiercely slashed down from the sky. However, as soon as the sword light landed, it instantly shattered. At the same time, an illusory black giant claw suddenly appeared in front of him. This giant claw contained an extremely powerful force, and if he was caught by it, he would definitely be smashed to pieces. Yi Xian did not dare to be careless. He fiercely stomped his right foot on the rock below, and a powerful sword intent instantly condensed in the sword in his hand. In the next moment, he fiercely slashed down from the sky. Chi! With a slash of the sword, the space was instantly shattered. Although Yi Xian was only at the true defense law realm, this slash already had the power of the void-piercing law realm. A slash of the sword fell. Boom! The black giant claw trembled violently, and rapidly fell from the sky, while Yi Xian's entire body also trembled violently, especially his arm, which felt sore and numb. Such a powerful force. Yi Xian slightly frowned. This demonic beast was much stronger than the demonic beasts he had seen before. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian took out a long bamboo, and then put it into his storage ring. He was just about to leave, when at this moment, he suddenly stopped and looked down. In the darkness below, a pair of huge eyes suddenly appeared. This pair of eyes was incomparably scarlet, as if it could suck away one's soul, and it was extremely strange. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian hurriedly turned around and ran, but at this moment, a black stream of air suddenly appeared above Yi Xian's head, and in the next moment, this black stream of air directly enveloped Yi Xian. Yi Xian was shocked, and fiercely slashed down with his sword. However, as soon as the sword light appeared, it was directly shattered. In the next moment, a powerful force directly dragged Yi Xian down. In a short while, Yi Xian completely disappeared from the bottom of the cliff. And the entire bottom of the cliff returned to calm. Chapter 354. Yi Xian was enveloped by the force and fell. At this moment, his body was emitting rays of sword light. It was these rays of sword light that resisted the force. Therefore, he was not crushed by the force. After an unknown amount of time, Yi Xian suddenly felt his feet stepping on the ground. The next moment, a golden sword quietly condensed in his palm. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xian held the Halran Gaia in his hand and fiercely slashed forward. Boom! The force that enveloped him shattered. At this moment, he was already at the bottom of the cliff. His surroundings were very dark, but not completely dark. This was because there were some stones that emitted a silver light on the surrounding walls. Therefore, although it was very dark, he could still see a little, but not far. Yi Xian held the Halran Gaia and was extremely vigilant. This was because he could feel that there were some auras spying on him in the darkness. Yi Xian was silent. His right hand held the sword tightly. Streams of earth force continuously gathered towards him. At this moment, the ground in front of him suddenly trembled, and a powerful pressure came crashing down on him. Yi Xian's expression became somewhat ferocious. He took a step forward and slashed forward with the sword in both hands. One sword to determine life and death. This sword to determine life and death, with the support of the earth force, could be said to be on the next level. Wherever the sword passed, the space was directly shocked and cracked. It was extremely frightening. At this moment, a huge monster rushed in front of Yi Xian. This huge monster directly collided with Yi Xian's sword. Boom! A deafening explosion resounded, and then a wail resounded as the colossus was blasted away. In the air, the huge monster began to crack inch by inch. Blood splattered everywhere. It was extremely bloody. One sword to kill a big demon of the true imperial magic realm. Yi Xian looked around and said ferociously, "You want me to die? Come on." As his voice fell, he held the sword with both hands and stabbed it into the ground. Boom! The ground in front of him cracked in an instant, and a powerful sword chi shot out in all directions. In the darkness around him, some demonic beasts retreated rapidly. At this moment, the sound of footsteps suddenly rang out not far in front of Yi Xian. As the footsteps rang out, an invisible pressure crushed towards him like a monstrous wave. With the appearance of this pressure, Yi Xian's aura suddenly dropped, as though he was about to suffocate. He hurriedly released his evil thoughts sword intent. With the appearance of this sword intent, the pressure instantly lightened. At this moment, a woman appeared in front of him. The girl looked very young, not even 20 years old, and she wore a black dress. The woman walked in front of Yi Xian and stared at Yi Xian quietly. "Human, do you think you're very powerful?" Yi Xian said coolly, "You guys came to deal with me with such a grand lineup. Looks like that person paid a huge price. However, I'm a student of the Dao Yi Academy now. Aren't you afraid of angering the Dao Yi Academy by doing this?" The woman chuckled, "If you die here, the Dao Yi Academy will think it's an accident, right?" Yi Xian smiled, "Let me ask you a question. What did that person give you for you to go to such lengths to deal with me?" The woman said indifferently, 30,000 violet source crystals, 30,000 violet source crystals. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said in astonishment, "You're that cheap?" The woman frowned, and she suddenly vanished on the spot. In the distance, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically, and he slashed with the sword in his right hand. Boom! The sword light shattered, and Yi Xian retreated by over 90 meters. When he stopped, he was shocked to find that cracks had appeared on the heaven-grade sword in his hand. How powerful! In the distance. The woman was about to attack again when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Wait." The woman stopped, and Yi Xian smiled, "I have no ill intentions. I just feel that 30,000 violet source crystals is too cheap for an expert like you." The woman remained expressionless. "Then how much do you think I'm worth?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "A single attack is worth at least 50,000. The woman looked Yi Xian in the eyes. "What are you trying to say?" Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. A moment later, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body. A sword immortal. The woman's expression changed slightly when she sensed this aura. Obviously, she hadn't expected Yi Xian to be a sword immortal. After a moment of silence, the woman laughed coldly, "Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Yi Xian shook his head, and then he flicked his finger, causing a spatial ring to fall in front of the woman. The woman glanced at it, and there were 50,000 violet source crystals within it. The woman frowned slightly at the sight of this. "What do you mean?" Yi Xian smiled, "What I like to do the most is to make friends. You've come out to fight for 30,000 violet source crystals, so you must be in urgent need of violet source crystals. Consider this a token of my appreciation. How about we get to know each other? My name is Yi Xian." The woman looked straight at Yi Xian for a long time, before she finally said in an indifferent voice, "I'm a person with principles." As she spoke, she put away the spatial ring. "Jing Wu." "Jing Wu?" Yi Xian was stunned, and then he asked, "Is that your name?" The woman nodded. "Why? Doesn't it sound nice?" Yi Xian hurriedly said, "It sounds nice." The woman glanced at Yi Xian, and then she hesitated for a moment before she said, "Lend me 100,000 violet source crystals." Yi Xian was slightly stunned. In the next moment, he flicked his finger, and a spatial ring fell in front of the woman. There were 150,000 violet source crystals within the spatial ring. This time, the woman was stunned. Yi Xian smiled and said, "I'm lending it to you, so you have to return it." The woman glanced at Yi Xian and asked, "What's your name?" Yi Xian's face darkened. She hadn't remembered my name at all. Yi Xian said, "Yi Xian, Yi as in Yi, Xian as in Yi Xian." Yu Zi nodded slightly. "I'll remember it." As she spoke, she glanced at Yi Xian and said, "My name is Wu Jing." "Wu Jing." Yi Xian was speechless. A short while later, Yi Xian left. A demon beast walked out from behind Wu Jing. It glanced at the sky and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, we promised Mu Chang." Wu Jing spoke indifferently. Mu Chang never said that he wasn't a sword emperor, but a sword immortal. Killing a sword emperor is completely different from killing a sword immortal. The Academy won't pay much attention to a sword emperor, but do you think the Academy won't care if he kills a sword immortal? The demon beast fell silent. As Wu Jing had said, even the Dao Yi Academy would pay great attention to a sword immortal at such a young age. At this moment, Wu Jing spoke again. This person has become a sword immortal at such a young age, so he must have a huge force behind him. I have no enmity with him, so why should I become his sworn enemy for 30,000 purple source crystals and bring trouble to myself? The demon beast nodded slightly. Your Highness has thought things through. Right at this moment, an old man suddenly appeared near Wu Jing. It was Mu Chang. Mu Chang looked at Wu Jing coldly. You didn't kill him. Wu Jing's face was expressionless. You concealed his true strength. True strength? Mu Chang frowned slightly. What do you mean? Wu Jing shook his head. It's fine if you don't know. As she spoke, she flicked her finger and a spatial ring fell in front of Mu Chang. This is your 30,000 purple source crystals. I'll return it to you. Mu Chang's face was slightly gloomy. Are you going back on your word? Wu Jing glanced coldly at Mu Chang. Hurry up and fuck off before I change my mind. Mu Chang's face instantly became extremely unsightly. However, he didn't dare say anything because he knew how strong Wu Jing was. After a short moment of silence, Mu Chang spoke in a low voice. Your Highness, can you tell me why you changed your mind? Wu Jing ignored Mu Chang and turned around to leave. Mu Chang's face turned from gloomy to ferocious when he saw this. A short while later, he roared fiercely, I don't believe I can't kill you. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished on the spot. Wu Jing walked towards the depths of the abyss. She glanced at the 2 spatial rings in her hand and said, Pass down my order. If he comes to get the bamboo, tell them not to obstruct him. If they encounter him in the future, make it as convenient as possible. Understand? The demon beast by her side nodded. Understood. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Yi Xian left the abyss. It had to be said that he had gotten lucky this time. As for the 200,000 violet source crystals, he felt that it was worth it. 200,000 purple Genesis crystals to befriend an expert was definitely worth it. As for money, he did not place much importance on it. Most of the time, as long as a person was willing, he would be able to obtain more. Furthermore, if he wanted to fight in the abyss, he would have to use the world prison pagoda later on. He had no confidence in defeating that woman alone, not to mention that there were so many powerful demonic beasts around. Mu Chang. Thinking of this person, Yi Xian's face turned cold. On the mountain, when Yi Xian came out and everyone saw him, Helian Xian and the others were all stunned. One of the men even blurted out, You're not dead? When Yi Xian disappeared, everyone had thought that Yi Xian was definitely dead. Yet now, Yi Xian was standing right in front of them. Yi Xian chuckled, Lucky, lucky. Those demonic beasts are vegetarian today, so they let me off. Everyone's mouths twitched. Who was he trying to fool? Helian Xian glanced at Yi Xian, You're not simple. Yi Xian chuckled, Miss Helian, I have something to ask you. Where is teacher Mu Chang? Hearing this, Helian Xian's eyes narrowed, What do you want? Yi Xian chuckled, Nothing much, I just have some matters to settle with him. Helian Xian was about to speak, when a man suddenly pointed to the right, There's a valley about 10 li away. The teachers live in that valley. Teacher Mu Chang is also there. Yi Xian cupped his fists, Many thanks. After that, he turned and walked away. On the spot, He Lianxian hesitated for a moment, and then she quickly followed after him. The others hurriedly followed after her as well. Soon, Yi Xian came to a valley. In the valley, there were many bamboo houses. These bamboo houses were all the same size. Yi Xian stood in front of the valley. He stomped on the ground, and a golden sword suddenly condensed in his palm. In the next moment, he roared, "Old dog Mu Chang, come out and die." Following this voice, Helian Xian and the others who followed him over were instantly petrified. A gentleman's revenge is never too late. As for him, Yi Xian's revenge, he would do it from morning till night. P.S. Green Wan is not arrogant. It's just that reality is too bad. It's too difficult to deal with worldly affairs. Chapter 355. In front of the valley, Helian Xian and the others looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. They didn't expect Yi Xian to challenge an outer court tutor in public. This hadn't happened in Dao Yi Academy for a long time. As Yi Xian finished his words, more people appeared around him. They were all very young and the lowest was at the true imperial law realm. Obviously, they were outer court students. At this moment, those outer yard students were sizing up Yi Xian curiously. Everyone had different expressions on their faces. Some were gloating, some were curious, and some were sneering. Challenging an outer court tutor, no matter if he succeeded or not, would offend the higher-ups of the academy. To many people, this behavior was absolutely unwise. And Yi Xian himself was very clear about this. However, he knew that if he didn't put an end to it, this matter would never end. Make it big. This was his goal. Soon, an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was Feng Jing. Feng Jing stared at Yi Xian. "What do you want?" Yi Xian said calmly, "I want to spar with Tutor Mu Chang, the kind where we fight to the death." Feng Jing narrowed his eyes. "Do you know what you're doing?" Yi Xian nodded. "I know." Feng Jing said in a deep voice, "Leave now and I can pretend that nothing happened." Yi Xian shook his head. "No." Feng Jing's eyes turned cold. "It seems that you didn't remember what the old man told you before." Yi Xian chuckled. "I naturally remember Tutor Feng Jing's words. However, after I entered the academy, I was targeted everywhere. First, I was besieged by 3 void-piercing realm elites in the city, then a mysterious elite attacked me at the bottom of the cliff. If I didn't have some trump cards, I'm afraid I would have died." Speaking of this, he looked up at the valley in the distance. "Mu Chang, don't you want me to die?" "I, Yi Xian, will give you a chance now. If you're a man, then King stand up. Don't play these dirty tricks behind my back." Just as Feng Jing was about to say something, 2 old men suddenly appeared beside him. One of them was Mu Chang. The other was an old man wearing a long black robe. His expression was somewhat cold. Mu Chang glared at Yi Xian. "Why? Didn't your family teach you about seniority?" Yi Xian suddenly pointed his sword at Mu Chang. "Mu Chang, cut the crap. Just tell me, are you going to fight or not?" "Arrogant." The old man beside Mu Chang suddenly said angrily, "You, a student, actually dared to challenge a teacher, you." A powerful aura suddenly emanated from within Yi Xian's body. At the same time, a sword will appeared out of nowhere in the surroundings. Seeing this scene, everyone was instantly stunned. Sword Immortal. This was a sword immortal. Mu Chang stared at Yi Xian in disbelief. His fists were clenched tightly, and his hands were trembling. A sword emperor below the age of 20 wasn't rare. However, a sword immortal below the age of 20 was extremely rare. After all, the difference between a sword emperor and a sword immortal wasn't just a little bit. Now, he finally understood why the eldest brothers and Wu Jing had given up on killing Yi Xian. Once such a monster died here, it would definitely draw the attention of the higher-ups of the academy. Moreover, Yi Xian's strength was formidable, so it was difficult to kill him. The black-robed old man by Mu Chang's side spoke in a low voice. "You're a sword immortal." At this moment, his tone had become much gentler. Yi Xian bowed slightly to the black-robed old man and Feng Jing. "Seniors, I, Yi Xian, am not someone who doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and the earth. It's just that Mu Chang has acted against me time and time again with the intention of making me his mortal enemy. I have no choice but to do this." Hearing this, the black-robed old man glanced at Mu Chang, and then he looked at Yi Xian. "According to what I know, you killed Elder Mu Chang's grandson." Yi Xian nodded. "As for the reason, I believe Mu Chang hasn't told Senior about it. Then I'll tell you again. I killed a demon beast, and Elder Mu Chang's grandson wanted to take it from me. I refused, so he wanted to kill me. So I killed him." After Yi Xian finished speaking, the black-robed old man looked at Mu Chang. "What do you say?" Mu Chang stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "Didn't you want to challenge me? Come on." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged directly at Yi Xian. Opposite Mu Chang, Yi Xian suddenly stomped his right foot, and then he slashed forward with Haoran Gaia. Hiss! A strand of golden sword chi slashed out fiercely. Bang! Under the gazes of the crowd, Mu Chang was directly pushed back several dozen feet by the sword strike. As soon as he stopped moving, Yi Xian appeared in front of him once more. At the same time, Yi Xian slashed down once more. Mu Chang's expression changed drastically. A spear suddenly appeared in his right hand. In the next moment, the spear in his hand was like a worm emerging from the ocean, and it stabbed at the blade of Yi Xian's sword. Bang! The spear and sword collided, and both of them retreated explosively. However, as soon as Mu Chang stopped moving, a sword had appeared between his brows without the slightest sign. Void flash. Mu Chang's expression changed drastically. His reaction was extremely swift. He let go of the spear in his right hand, and then he swiftly pressed his palms together. Bang! However, right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared above him. At the same time, a sword carried a strand of golden light as it slashed down fiercely. Mu Chang was horrified. He didn't dare go head-on against this attack, and he immediately retreated 300 m back. However, while he was retreating, numerous flying swords had arrived in front of him, and each one was swifter than the last. Bang! 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 Under the solemn gazes of the spectators, Mu Chang retreated repeatedly. Suppression. At this moment, Mu Chang was completely suppressed by Yi Xian, and he practically didn't even have the ability to fight back. The expressions of many in the surroundings instantly turned solemn when they witnessed this scene. Yi Xian's combat strength had truly exceeded their expectations. Bang! Right at this moment, an enormous explosion suddenly resounded from afar. Everyone looked over and saw Mu Chang's figure being blasted flying, and then he smashed heavily against a mountain wall. As soon as Mu Chang stopped moving, Yi Xian had appeared in front of him. The expressions of Feng Jing and Yi Xian changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and Feng Jing hurriedly said, "Stop." He hadn't even finished speaking when Yi Xian's sword stabbed through the center of Mu Chang's forehead, and then blood instantly sprayed. Everyone was stunned when they witnessed this scene. He killed him? He really dared to kill him? A student killed an instructor? Feng Jing and Yi Xian were stunned as well. They hadn't imagined that Yi Xian would actually dare to kill him, and he'd even killed him right before their eyes. Even though the center of Mu Chang's forehead had been pierced, he still hadn't perished. He stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Even until the moment of his death, he'd never imagined that Yi Xian would actually dare to kill him in front of so many people. He was an external assistance instructor of Dao Yi Academy. Mu Chang gazed at Feng Jing with a trace of a pleading expression in his eyes. Even though the center of his forehead had been pierced through by Yi Xian, his soul could still be saved. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly slashed down with his sword. Mu Chang's body split apart. At the same time, a mysterious force shattered Mu Chang's soul. A single strike to the soul. He'd never forgotten this move. Now, he'd noticed how formidable this move was. Because after one attained the true control realm, the soul of a cultivator would become extremely powerful. Especially experts at the void destruction realm, they were extremely difficult to kill. Because even if the opponent's body was destroyed, the opponent's soul would still be there. However, with this single strike to the soul, it would truly annihilate the opponent's soul. Feng Jing and the black-robed old man were instantly furious when they saw Yi Xian slash apart Mu Chang's soul as well. Feng Jing stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Do you think that you can do whatever you want in my Dao Yi Academy just because your natural talent is extremely high? Yi Xian sheathed his sword and bowed slightly to the two of them. I told him earlier that we'll fight to the death. Feng Jing gazed at Yi Xian for a long time, and then he said, take him to his cell. As soon as he finished speaking, 3 black-clothed figures appeared soundlessly in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Right at this moment, Helian Xian's voice suddenly resounded within his mind, don't resist. Chapter 356. Think again. The bamboo house fell silent. Even Mu He didn't say anything. At this time, Feng Jing said, we need a swordsman. We need a swordsman. Hearing this, Wang Qianya and Mu He were slightly stunned. The next moment, they seemed to have thought of something, and their expressions gradually changed. After a moment, Mu He said in a low voice, this person is stubborn and mischievous. Feng Jing looked at Mu He. If this kind of character is used against outsiders, won't it be a sharp sword? Mu He was slightly stunned, and after a moment, he shook his head, not saying anything. Feng Jing said again, this person reached sword immortal before the age of 20. This kind of talent, even in the immortal sword sect, is rare. Mu He shook his head, what you said makes sense, but are we just going to let him kill Mu Chang go? Feng Jing said solemnly, Mu Chang harmed a student of my Dao Yi Academy in such a manner. Moreover, it was such a monstrous student. I feel that he has seriously violated the rules of my Dao Yi Academy. He only has himself to blame for this outcome. Speaking up to here, he looked at the two. In this era, talent is the most important. This Yi Xian's talent in swordsmanship is so strong, I feel that we should keep him here. Of course, this person is hot-tempered and needs to be strictly controlled. Mu He still wanted to say something, but Wang Qianya suddenly said, stay. The two looked at Wang Qianya. The latter said lightly, in the end, it was Mu Chang's fault, he was just protecting himself. However, this matter can't be settled like this. From now on, temporarily abolish his outer court student status, demote him to an external affairs disciple, and let him do odd jobs in the 100 Orchard. Simply put, external affairs disciples do odd jobs. Feng Jing thought about it, then nodded, that's fine, let's first dampen his spirit, or else he will cause a lot of trouble in the academy in the future. Mu He also nodded, let him go to the 100 Orchard. Just like this, the three made the final decision. After Mu He and Feng Jing left, Wang Qianya took out a scroll, on which was all the information on Yi Xian. Looking at the line of words on the scroll, Wang Qianya fell into silence. These words were, Interstellar Bounty List Treasure. An hour later, Yi Xian was brought to a garden by Feng Jing. The garden was very big and divided into many areas. Each area was planted with different spirit fruits and spirit herbs. Feng Jing turned around and glanced at Yi Xian. This is the 100 Orchard. It needs to be watered with the spiritual spring 3 times a day. The spiritual spring is 30 li to the north. Remember, you can't miss it, or you will be severely punished. Yi Xian was silent. Feng Jing sighed in a low voice, I told you before, young people, don't be too casual, especially in this academy. You think you're a monster, but there are people even more monstrous than you. P.S. If I ask for a ticket, will you call me shameless? Chapter 357. Something's not right. That was what Yi Xian was thinking at this moment. Because these two people were obviously looking for trouble with him, and the problem was that he didn't know them at all. There was absolutely no hatred in this world for no reason. There must be a reason for these two people to come looking for him. Thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed forward. He didn't ask why these two people were looking for trouble with him. He only knew that when dealing with people like this, there was only one word: kill them. Seeing Yi Xian's sudden attack, the woman in white and the man in white were stunned. Obviously, they didn't expect that Yi Xian would really dare to attack them directly. Both of them reacted extremely quickly, especially the woman in white. At the moment when Yi Xian drew his sword, she waved her right hand, and a white light surged out. Bang! As an explosion resounded, both of them retreated rapidly, and this time, they each retreated more than 30 meters. Just when the woman in white was about to attack again, an angry shout suddenly resounded in the area. Stop! As soon as the voice resounded, an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian. The person who came was the outer court vice dean, Wang Qinya. Seeing Wang Qinya, the woman in white stopped as well. Wang Qinya glanced coldly at the three of them. This is the 100 Orchard, an important place of our Dao Yi Academy. How dare you attack here? Do you want to die? The man in embroidered clothes next to the woman in white suddenly pointed at Yi Xian. He attacked first. Wang Qinya turned to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian took out a voice transmission stone, and the conversation between the woman in white and the man in embroidered clothes played in the voice transmission stone. This voice transmission stone had the ability to record voices. When he heard the voice in the voice transmission stone, Wang Qinya's expression instantly turned cold. He turned to look at the woman in white and the man in white in the distance. The women in white and the man in white had slightly ugly expressions. Obviously, they didn't expect that Yi Xian would actually play this move. The woman in white glanced at Yi Xian. Next time, you won't be so lucky. After saying that, the two turned to leave. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, "What next time? Come, let's fight to the death this time." After saying that, he carried his sword and walked toward the woman in white. The woman in the white dress stopped in her tracks. She turned around to look at Yi Xian, her eyes cold. Do you think this is the Blue Sword Sect? Without Blue Sword Sect to protect you, let's see how strong you are. Blue Sword Sect will be for you. At the side, Wang Qinya suddenly said, "What, do you think I don't exist?" Just when Yi Xian was about to speak, Wang Qinya looked at him and said, "Go back and water yourself." Everyone might be afraid of the Pale Sword Sect, but they would not be afraid of him, Yi Xian. And those who knew the real reason were basically all dead. And those who were still alive were his people, so they would definitely not spread the news. Thinking of this, Yi Xian shook his head and sighed. This was going to be a big problem. Now that he had a great treasure, more and more people would come looking for him. So troublesome. Yi Xian shook his head again. As if thinking of something, he turned to Wang Qinya. "Dean, how can I join the inner court?" Wang Qinya glanced at Yi Xian. "You want to join the inner court now?" Yi Xian nodded. Join the inner court. Now, he already felt a crisis, a great crisis. He must do everything he could to improve his strength, and Yu Qi's matter could not be delayed. He did not want to waste time here. Wang Qinya said in a low voice, "If you enter the inner court now, you will definitely be targeted by Nanshan." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Don't worry." Wang Qinya glanced at Yi Xian, and after a moment of silence, he said softly, "If you want to enter the inner court, you can do so at any time." Yi Xian was stunned. So simple? Wang Qinya shook his head and smiled. "You are a sword immortal." With that, he paused for a moment. "Follow me." Just like that, Yi Xian followed Wang Qinya, and after about an hour, the two came to the depths of a mountain range. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stopped and said with a smile, "Deputy Dean Wang, this should not be the way to the inner court, right? Wang Qinya turned and looked directly at Yi Xian. That treasure on the top of the interstellar bounty list is with you, right? Yi Xian smiled slightly, so it is for this. With that, he looked around and said with a smile, this place is quiet, perfect for killing people and robbing treasures. Wang Qinya stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, you should know that the treasure will only bring endless disasters to you. Why not give it to the old man, and the old man will guarantee you to enter the inner court? What do you think? Yi Xian said with a smile, if I give it to you, I am afraid you will kill me immediately, right? Wang Qinya narrowed his eyes, you are too smart. But those who are too smart do not live long. Another old man showed up behind Yi Xian as soon as he finished speaking. This person was Sickle Mu. Yi Xian fell silent. He now realized that he had underestimated the temptation of the prison pagoda. Wang Qinya suddenly said, Yi Xian, the old man knows that you are very strong and have some hidden cards, but you should understand that even if you win, you will not be able to walk out of Dao Yi Academy alive. You killed the deputy dean and a teacher, so my Dao Yi Academy will hunt you down and kill you. If you hand over the treasure and leave Dao Yi Academy, the old man will let you live, and he will keep his word. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then he suddenly looked up and roared, help. With the support of his profound energy, his voice shook the entire sky like thunder. The sound was too loud. It was loud enough to be heard by the whole outer court. In front of Yi Xian, Wang Qinya and Sickle Mu were dumbfounded. Shouting for help? Yi Xian's move undoubtedly made the two of them short-circuit for a moment. At this time, Yi Xian shouted a few more times, and when Wang Qinya and Sickle Mu came to their senses, several powerful auras were rushing in their direction. Seeing this scene, the two who were about to attack dared not move. Wang Qinya stared at Yi Xian, if you dare to speak nonsense, the old man will make you die a horrible death. At this time, Feng Jing, an old man, and a middle-aged man appeared in the square. When they saw Yi Xian's group, Feng Jing and the other two were stunned. Feng Jing looked at Yi Xian, you shouted for help? Yi Xian quickly ran over. He looked flustered and pale, as if he was frightened. Feng Jing frowned, what happened? In the distance, Wang Qinya was about to speak, but Yi Xian suddenly said in panic, Mentor Feng, Vice Dean Wang and the others want to kill me, they want to kill me. Hearing this, Wang Qinya's face suddenly turned ugly, Yi Xian, what nonsense are you talking about? Yi Xian ignored Wang Qinya, he hid behind Feng Jing, looked at Wang Qinya and Sickle Mu with some fear, and said in a trembling voice, they tricked me to come here, want to kill me and take my treasure, I am so scared. Wang Qinya stared at Yi Xian, his eyes cold, do you know what is the crime of slandering a vice dean and a mentor? Yi Xian seemed to be afraid, hurriedly hid, his body slightly trembling, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. Feng Jing and the other two glanced at Yi Xian, then looked at Wang Qinya and Sickle Mu. Wang Qinya said in a low voice, you believe him? Feng Jing said in a low voice, I think this matter should be decided by the great elder. Hearing this, Wang Qinya narrowed his eyes, Feng Jing, what do you mean? Feng Jing said indifferently, nothing, but, this matter is serious, it needs the great elder to deal with it. Then, he turned around and left with Yi Xian. At this time, Wang Qinya suddenly said angrily, presumptuous. It is not your turn to make decisions in the outer court. Feng Jing stopped and said coldly, Vice Dean Wang, what, you want to punish me? Wang Qinya stared at Feng Jing, do you really want to go against the old man for him? At this time, Yi Xian suddenly stood up, and said indignantly, what else do you want? I have given you the treasure, can't you let me live? You are so cruel. Wang Qinya. After the first elder and the others left, Feng Jing looked at Yi Xian and said in a deep voice, you have to keep this matter a secret. Otherwise, the consequences will be dire. Yi Xian said softly, Vice Dean, I wish to enter the inner court. Feng Jing hesitated for a while before saying, I'll handle it. I'll look for you when the time comes. Go back and rest first. After saying that, he turned to leave with the two people beside him. After Feng Jing and the others left, Yi Xian's face darkened. The Interstellar Bounty Board. Before this, he didn't know what the Interstellar Bounty Board meant. But now, he gradually understood. Even someone of Wang Qinya's status was tempted. Perhaps, even the First Elder was tempted. After a moment, Yi Xian said softly, even in this Dao Yi Academy, it's not safe. His current situation was like a 3-year-old holding a gold brick and swaggering through the streets. The people around him would definitely be tempted. Other than that, there were also some experts outside who were probably looking for him. There was also a group of restless fellows in the pagoda. Sigh. Yi Xian sighed softly. He lay on the ground with his hands as a pillow. He was at a loss. There were quite a lot of enemies in the future. Enemies. As though he thought of something, he sat up abruptly. If there were enemies, there would be friends. Why not find a few more friends? Yi Xian found a deserted place and entered the prison pagoda. Yi Xian arrived at the second floor. The great god on the second floor was still in seclusion. Helpless, he could only go to the third floor. More accurately, he went to the entrance of the fourth floor. Yi Xian walked to the entrance of the fourth floor. He smiled. Senior, let's talk. No response. Yi Xian wasn't discouraged. He asked again, Senior, do you want to come out? There was still no response. Nothing could get through to him. Yi Xian shook his head. Just as he was about to leave, a voice rang out. You don't have the qualifications to talk to me. Come back when you reach the Supreme Realm. Yi Xian was stunned. The next moment, he snorted. You're ignoring me now. In the future, I'll make sure you won't be able to reach me. After speaking, he turned and ran. First floor. Yi Xian found Xiaolinger. At this moment, Xiaolinger was planting spirit fruits. With the chaotic qi, the growth of these spirit fruits could be said to be astonishing. Yi Xian was slightly hesitant. Should I tell Xiaolinger that I'm actually very good at fighting? Xiaolinger is really good at fighting. And if she finds out that I'm very good at fighting, then I'm afraid she won't be able to control me in the future. A short moment later, Yi Xian left the pagoda of prison and returned to Baiguan. As soon as he returned to the 100 Orchard, Feng Jing appeared before him. Feng Jing stared fixedly at him. Vice Dean Wang and the other are dead. Yi Xian was stunned when he heard this. Dead? Feng Jing said in a low voice, Did you do it? Yi Xian laughed bitterly. Elder Feng, do you think I have the ability to do that? Feng Jing fell silent for a moment, and then he said, It's very strange. Vice Dean Wang and the other were silently killed not long after they arrived at Black Prison. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he was suddenly shocked. Then where's my treasure? Treasure. Feng Jing shook his head. Their spatial rings have been seized. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Was it done by someone from within the academy? Feng Jing fell silent. Yi Xian's face instantly sank when he saw this. Looks like it's very likely that it was done by someone from within the academy. He was sure that many people didn't know the true situation within the pagoda of prison. So, why would these people want to obtain it like madmen? Is it because it's ranked at the top of the interstellar bounty rankings? When he thought up to here, Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Senior Feng, what are the top 10 treasures on the interstellar bounty rankings? Feng Jing glanced at Yi Xian. The 10th ranked treasure is a precious treasure called the Milky Way Cauldron. The energy of the starry sky is contained within this cauldron, and if it's utilized, then even a supreme expert can be instantly killed. If it falls into the hands of a top-rate expert, then it isn't difficult for that expert to easily destroy an entire region. Yi Xian was petrified on the spot when he heard this. Now he knew why these people were so crazy. If the 10th ranked treasure was so terrifying, then how terrifying would the 1st ranked treasure be? No wonder these people were so jealous and came looking for him like rabid dogs. As if he thought of something, Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed. This kind of precious treasure, not to mention Wang Qianya and the others, the entire Dao Yi Academy would be tempted. Run. Hurry up and run. Yi Xian was about to slip away. At this moment, a black-clothed old man suddenly appeared between Yi Xian and the Feng realm. The black-clothed old man glanced at Yi Xian. First Elder wants you to go there. Yi Xian was stunned for a moment, and then he was wild with joy. Did you find my treasure? Did you find it? Go, quickly take me there. The Elder in Black. However, she already said that her real body would come to find me and take that thing away. The grey-robed elder stared at Yi Xian and asked, You came to Dao Yi Academy to seek refuge? Yi Xian nodded. There are many people chasing after me outside, so I don't dare to run around. Thus, I wanted to find a safe place. However, I didn't expect, here. He didn't say anything else. Everyone in the hall looked at each other. At this time, the Grand Elder suddenly said, To ensure that the treasure is not with you, we want to see your storage ring. Is that okay? Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian hesitated. I have some treasures. The Grand Elder said indifferently, Don't worry, we won't take anything from you. We won't take anything from you. Yi Xian thought for a moment, then took off the storage ring on his finger. He flicked it lightly, and the storage ring flew to the Grand Elder. The Grand Elder glanced at the storage ring. There were a few heaven-grade treasures and some purple source crystals. There weren't many, only about 1,000. Everyone in the hall also glanced at Yi Xian's storage ring with their divine sense. After a while, the Grand Elder returned the storage ring to Yi Xian. He looked at Yi Xian and said, You can leave. Yi Xian bowed to everyone and turned to leave. Inside the hall, the Grand Elder asked in a low voice, What do you think? The grey-robed elder next to him said, What he said is only half true. We can't trust him completely. The Grand Elder nodded slightly. He said he gave the treasure to Wang Qianya. Do you think it's true? The grey-robed elder hesitated, then shook his head. He would never give such a precious treasure to anyone else. Therefore, I think that the treasure is still with him. He looked at the Grand Elder. It doesn't matter if it's with him or not. Now that news has spread throughout the academy, if something happens to him, everyone will think that Dao Yi Academy killed him and stole his treasure. If that happens, the reputation of our academy, which has lasted for thousands of years, will be ruined. Not far away, the beautiful woman also nodded slightly. Brother Lu Hua is right. He is now a student of our Dao Yi Academy. If anything happens to him in the academy, our Dao Yi Academy's reputation in the never-ending starfield will be tarnished. The grey-robed elder named Lu Hua nodded. Not only must we not let anything happen to him, but we must also protect him. The person who wants that treasure will not let this matter rest. Also, we should investigate the deaths of Wang Qianya and his companion. The Grand Elder was silent for a moment, then said, Whether he has the treasure or not, he will be a big problem. Those who want the treasure will swarm to our Dao Yi Academy. Then, should we expel him from Dao Yi Academy? A middle-aged man asked suddenly. The others fell silent. Feng Jing suddenly said, This person is extremely talented. If our Dao Yi Academy nurtures him carefully, he will become a super expert in the future. If we let him go, he will bear a grudge against our Dao Yi Academy. Moreover, the world will look down on our academy. The Grand Elder said in a low voice, That means we can't let him go or kill him now. Feng Jing said, Think about it, this person must have great fortune to be able to obtain such a precious treasure. Moreover, his talent is excellent, and his battle prowess is very strong. It is not a bad thing for our Dao E Academy to have him in our Dao E Academy. Moreover, if he really has the treasure, he will remain in our Dao E Academy. To a certain extent, he will belong to our Dao E Academy, won't he? Hearing this, everyone looked at each other. Now that he said it, it seemed to be true. Feng Jing continued, I feel that the most pressing matter at hand is to find the culprit who killed Vice Dean Wang and Vice Dean Wang. They actually dared to kill within the grounds of my Dao E Academy, and they even did it without making a sound. I feel that they are provoking my Dao E Academy. Lu Hua nodded, this matter needs to be investigated. Someone dared to kill 2 people in our Dao E Academy, and in the Black Prison. If we don't get to the bottom of this, and word gets out, our Dao E Academy will become a laughingstock. The Grand Elder suddenly said, I will get someone to investigate this matter. As for this Yi Xian, he is extremely talented. Let him enter the inner hall. Directly enter? The beautiful woman beside him asked. The Grand Elder replied indifferently, naturally. The lady thought about it and nodded, that's fine. With his talent, he can enter the inner hall directly. She then looked at Feng Jing not far away, you shall handle this matter. Deal with it. Feng Jing nodded, all right. With that, he turned and left. Inside the hall, everyone left, leaving only the Grand Elder alone. The Grand Elder looked out of the hall, his expression turning cold, not knowing what he was thinking. 100 Orchard. Feng Jing found Yi Xian, he looked at Yi Xian, get ready, follow me to the inner hall. Yi Xian was taken aback, I can go to the inner hall? Feng Jing nodded, the Grand Elder said it himself, it can't be false. Grand Elder. Yi Xian replied with an oh, no one knew what he was thinking. Feng Jing laughed, once you enter the inner hall, you can go to the Violet Flame Tower to train. Your training speed there will increase by several folds. Moreover, you will have the chance to obtain violet fire crystals. This is a good thing, you will know in the future. Go get ready. Yi Xian nodded, turned and left. On the way, Yi Xian's face was a little gloomy, his intuition told him that the Grand Elder did not want him to enter the inner hall, but to stay in the Dao E Academy. He was now sure that Wang Qianya and Lu Hua were killed by their own people in the Dao E Academy. If he entered the inner hall, there would be more troubles. But if he fled now, it would only be more troublesome. Because if he fled, the people in the Dao E Academy would think that the treasure was still with him, and at that time, he would have one more enemy, the Dao E Academy. If he stayed in the Dao E Academy, the Dao E Academy would be wary, and would not dare to do anything to him in the open. Not only that, if he stayed in the Dao E Academy, the experts outside would also be wary of him. Thinking of this, Yi Xian decided to stay. I'll take one step at a time. An hour later, Yi Xian left the 100 Orchard with Feng Jing. Under Feng Jing's guidance, Yi Xian came to a mountain peak. In front of them was a light array that was several feet wide. A teleportation array. Feng Jing led Yi Xian into the teleportation array. Soon after, the teleportation array trembled slightly, and the two disappeared into it. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian and Feng Jing arrived at a dense forest. Feng Jing, who was standing beside Yi Xian, said with a smile, this is the inner hall, and there are not many students in the inner hall. There are only 32 of them, but they are the geniuses among the geniuses, the monsters among the monsters. Saying this, the two walked out of the dense forest. As they walked out of the forest, a heat wave hit them in the face. Yi Xian raised his head and saw a huge valley in front of them. In the middle of the valley stood a tower that was emitting flames. The tower was over 10 feet tall, and its entire body was covered in flames, giving it a spectacular view. Feng Jing, who was standing beside Yi Xian, said with a smile, the Purple Flame Tower. Countless monstrous geniuses want to join my Dao E Academy, and the biggest reason is because of the Violet Fire Pagoda. Because cultivating in the pagoda is many times faster than outside, and the violet fire crystals in the pagoda can also refine the corporeal body, strengthening the meridians and bones. Saying this, he looked at Yi Xian. However, it's not easy to have a place in the Purple Flame Tower. It depends on your own ability. Yi Xian nodded slightly, and just when he was about to speak, a voice rang in his mind. There's a Tao rule. Yi Xian was stunned. It was not the voice of the great god on the second floor, but the mysterious man on the fourth floor. At this moment, Yi Xian said in his heart, what Tao rule? I don't want it, I don't want it. She did not seem to have done anything, but a long black whip directly swept across Yi Xian's sword. Bang! Along with a muffled sound, Bai Ling retreated explosively, and she retreated out of the hall. As soon as she stopped, a flying sword had arrived in front of her, and a saber suddenly slashed at the flying sword. Bang! The flying sword was directly slashed away. The man called Xiao Qian stared coldly at Yi Xian in front of Bai Ling. You think you're very good at fighting? You. His expression changed abruptly because Yi Xian had suddenly dashed towards him, and then a ray of sword light slashed down from the top of his head. Xiao Qian was shocked because Yi Xian had attacked without any warning, and he dared not think too much about it. He could only raise his saber instinctively to block it. Bang! Xiao Qian was instantly blasted away by Yi Xian's slash, and two flying swords flashed in the air. Xiao Qian's pupils suddenly constricted, and he suddenly clenched his teeth as he held the saber with both hands and swept it swiftly. The space around him shook, and it was extremely domineering. Bang! The two flying swords were directly slashed away, but Xiao Qian instantly retreated over 30 meters, and as soon as he stopped, a trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. At this moment, both Xiao Qian and Bai Ling's expressions were extremely solemn. Yi Xian's strength was a little different from what they'd imagined. At this moment, 7 or 8 people had gathered around them, and all of them were young people. Obviously, they were all inner court students. Many of them were curiously sizing up Yi Xian because Yi Xian looked too unfamiliar. Yi Xian walked towards the two of them with a smile on his face. Don't tell me the two of you intend to join forces against me? Everyone looked at Bai Ling and Xiao Qian when they heard that, and their expressions instantly turned slightly unsightly. Yi Xian was slightly astonished. Don't tell me the two of you really intend to fight 2 against 1? Xiao Qian stared fixedly at Yi Xian and sneered, do I need to fight 2 against 1 to fight you? Yi Xian smiled, you have backbone. I like it. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot, and when he appeared again, he was already in front of Xiao Qian. In the next moment, Xiao Qian saw a ray of sword light. It was a very simple and direct attack. Xiao Qian didn't choose to dodge, and he chose to meet it head-on instead. He suddenly stomped his right foot, and the ground rumbled and shattered. At the same time, he held the saber with both hands and suddenly slashed upwards. Bang! A deafening explosion resounded, and then the spectators watched as Xiao Qian retreated repeatedly. At the same time, blood sprayed from his mouth repeatedly. All the students in the surroundings instantly gazed at Yi Xian when they witnessed this scene, and there was a trace of surprise in their eyes. After Xiao Qian stopped moving, he wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth, and he was just about to speak when a flying sword suddenly arrived before the center of his forehead. Void Flash. Presently, his utilization of Void Flash could be said to have attained the acme of perfection. The surroundings suddenly fell silent when Yi Xian's sword arrived before the center of Xiao Qian's forehead. Xiao Qian stared fixedly at Yi Xian. He didn't speak, and he didn't reveal even a trace of fear. Yi Xian walked over to Xiao Qian, and then he seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly turned around to look at a nearby man and asked with a smile on his face, "Can I kill here?" The man glanced at Yi Xian and said, "You can. However, the price will be huge. A light punishment will be heavy, and a heavy punishment will be expulsion from the academy." Expulsion from the academy. Yi Xian nodded slightly. He turned to Shao Qian and said with a smile, anyone who knows me, Yi Xian, knows that I, Yi Xian, am a very reasonable person, and also a very good-tempered person. I don't want to go to the extreme, so how about this? I'll give you 200,000 violet Genesis crystals in exchange for your life. What do you think? You won't lose out, right? 200,000 violet Genesis crystals. Everyone's expressions immediately turned a little strange when they heard this. Violet Genesis crystals were extremely precious in the inner court, and they were also extremely important. Violet Genesis crystals were needed to enter the Violet Flame Tower to cultivate, and they were extremely rare. Hence, they were extremely precious in the inner court. Yet, Yi Xian had asked for 200,000. It had to be said that he was asking for too much. In front of Yi Xian, Shao Qian stared fixedly at Yi Xian and said, have you gone crazy from thinking about money? Yi Xian said with a smile, are you saying that 200,000 purple source crystals are more valuable than your life? Shao Qian stared at Yi Xian with a sneer on his face. Yi Xian, try and touch me. Yi Xian fell silent. Shao Qian's smile turned somewhat sinister. I beg you, touch me. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly slashed down with his sword. Chi! Under everyone's gaze, Shao Qian's right arm flew off and blood spurted out like a fountain. Everyone was stunned at the sight of this. Was he really going to kill him? In front of Shao Qian, Yi Xian looked around and said innocently, the heavens and earth can bear witness, he was the one who begged me to do it. P.S. Where can I find a proper sword? Why is it that the places other people bring me to are not proper? You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.